have a role, and it's a statutory role. Under section 227, it's the role of the officers and employees of the municipality. So officers are important to keep in mind. Officers are your clerk, your treasurer, your chief building official, your integrity commissioner, those people who hold a chair and have a statutory role to fill. So all of those officers and employees have the obligation to implement council's decisions. So council makes a policy decision at the table, then staff have to implement that. And typically the direction from the table goes to your clerk or CAO, and then that person is responsible for disseminating the direction to staff. That's typically how the system works. So staff is responsible to implement council's decisions and establish administrative practices and procedures to carry out council's decisions. And so you may, as council, ask staff for things like their recommended organization chart that gets adopted, the staff council relations policy that deals with how staff communicate with council and how council communicates with staff. Paragraph B is an interesting one, and I'll back up to the officers. If you look at officers like your integrity commissioner, like your chief building official, they have a statutory obligation to uphold their piece of legislation. So the chief building official, for example, has the obligation to enforce the building code. So council does not have the jurisdiction to tell the chief building official, okay, don't enforce the building code against my brother. If you could tell them that, but the officer has the obligation to follow their statutory rule anyway. Same with the clerk, same with the treasurer, same with the integrity commissioner. Paragraph B is all officers and employees have a statutory obligation to undertake research and provide advice to council on the policies and programs of the municipality. And so staff actually have the obligation at a council meeting to provide their report, including advice and recommendations. I've been hearing recently that councillors think that staff have an obligation to be balanced and unbiased. That's not what this section says. They actually have an obligation to tell council what they think is the best course for council to take. Now, that doesn't mean that they have an obligation or even a right to control council. They have the obligation under the statute to provide their advice. And Nuala Kenny, who works at my office now, she was the city solicitor in Sault Ste. Marie for 20 plus years. And she said that her boss used to tell her, okay, our role as legal counsel for the municipality is to give her advice and cash her paycheck. So it's funny, but it really clarifies it. So staff's role is to provide advice, is to provide recommendations, and then let council do whatever they want. Council's role back in 224 is to make the policy decisions. And sometimes council will make a decision that's against staff's advice, and that's okay. Sometimes council will make a decision that's against the law, and that's also okay. As long as council is aware and has been advised, okay, you're breaching this piece of legislation, and here are the consequences. And I had that happen with a new municipal client, and they did not have a Bill 132 anti-harassment policy, and they did not have a bunch of the 270 policies in place. And so they came to me and they said, okay, what do we have to do? And I gave them a big laundry list, and they said, okay, we're gonna decide to do number 1 and 2 first, because that's the resources that they have. And so they actively decided, we're not gonna put a harassment policy in place yet, because we need to focus on our code of conduct or whatever it was. So they decided specifically, we're going to do this, which meant that they were going to breach the act because they didn't have the resources to do it all at the same time. And that's council's prerogative. Council can say, this is how we're going to spend the resources of the municipality. And I understand that there's a problem, but we want to solve the major risks first. The other thing that staff has to do is carry out other duties required under this act or any other duties assigned by the municipality. So what that means is specific staff have roles defined by the municipal act, like the clerk, the treasurer, the integrity commissioner. So they have to carry out those roles and any other duties assigned by the municipality. So lots of our municipalities have somebody that's a clerk treasurer or CAO, clerk treasurer, dog catcher. So the council can decide that we're going to assign all of these duties to this person or these people. And that person then has the roles that are assigned by the municipality. Any questions on that? Okay. Mary Lynn has a question. Go ahead.
So just from experience and stuff, it's a challenge when you do have the clerk that is performing the CAO job?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
That's all. Because I just think there's not enough of a definition.
Yeah.
And if the municipality is rolled all into one, makes it.
So that happens in a lot of municipalities. And it happens almost by accident. And it happens when you get really high performing people in the role of clerk. Just bear with me a second. So the clerk's role is to, among other things, record without note or comment all resolutions, decisions, and other proceedings of the council. So that's the role, basically that's the role to take the minutes of council meetings. That doesn't mean that they don't have the obligations under 227 to provide advice. They have that in addition to keeping the minutes. The clerk is also, if required by any member present, to record the names of every member voting on any matter in question, so a recorded vote. Keep the originals or copies of all bylaws, and to perform the other duties required under this act, under any other act, and perform such other duties as assigned by the municipality. So that's statutorily the clerk's role. And that's, I shouldn't say it's this big, but it is constrained. And the reality for all the clerks at the table today is that you know that your job is way bigger than that.
All other duties it gets you.
Yeah, yeah. And the all other duties gets you because the CAO, sorry, backing up, you must have a clerk. You must have a clerk present at every meeting of council in order for it to be a legal meeting of council. 229 is the chief administrative officer. And this is interesting because you don't have to have a CAO. And it says that a municipality may appoint a chief administrative officer who shall be responsible for, paragraph A, exercising general control and management of the affairs of the municipality for the purpose of ensuring the efficient and effective operation of the municipality. Well, any municipality that has a clerk and not a CAO, the clerk is doing that job. All the clerks are going, yep, we do. And then perform such other duties as are assigned by the municipality. So the definition of a CAO role is really very broad and very vague, which is why as we're getting into this, we're going to talk about expectations and deliverables. And what I mean by that is, and that helps to assist all staff, whether it's a clerk at the top, whether it's a clerk treasurer, CAO, or any combination of those. It's really helpful for council to give that person clear written expectations and deliverables so that they know what it is that council wants them to do. Otherwise, they're trying their best and they're doing what they've done maybe for 20 years. And if you don't tell them as council that you wanted something different, then you're going to get the same. So expectations and deliverables are a really good way to assist staff in being successful in assisting council at looking good. Okay.
You're going backwards.
Does that
There
once in a
we
while.
go.
So one of the things that we decided when Peggy and I put this together was that we wanted you to get involved in this process. And so Peggy has created a bunch of activities that we're going to do, and this is the first of them. And I think we're going to tell you a story and have some fun with this one.
We are. So first, we need to get into groups.
Of how big?
Well,
You got 5?
I
Six.
have one for online,
Okay.
and then I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if we can break into a group that makes 5. 3,
That's like groups of pretty much 3.
3.
And some groups of 2. Okay. Do you want to do it, or do you want me to do it?
Because I would say we have a deck of cards. You could do it, absolutely. You can put them where you want.
Well, I'm gonna break up
So the people who are participating electronically,
Break up the lids.
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
you will be able to use the chat to be able to participate in this, and I will be your moderator. I'll be your voice here in the room.
Who here is on council?
We've got a few counselors in the room.
Okay, good. Let me see your here. Council is going to be that guy. And that guy. Okay. Can I give these out yet?
You may, well, we should pick the one first that for the people who are online.
Okay. Go ahead.
All right,
That's the rapier.
that's the rapier.
Okay, so that's the.
Mm-hmm. So have you divided them up, Paul?
Counselors.
Your group here, how many?
Two.
Ooh, we got the power.
You just wait. 3 of you are going to be Counselor Adams.
That's true.
Does everybody have a group? Yes. Excellent.
Okay, so then next, if you wish to take notes. Because I've got it on my phone.
You won't be able to see it on my. Oh. So we'll just have to
Well,
tell
you have to
them
read
start.
it, yeah.
Okay.
So that's why I was gonna give it notepads. You give it to that side of the room.
Yeah. Okay. That's funny.
Ready for you. Okay, so for those of you who are online, I'm going to let you know who you are in this story. Do you need, so here, Paul.
You got it?
Yeah, I already have it. So that's what I was doing while you were talking, was pulling it up so you could read it on there.
Okay, is everybody ready? Here's our story. And listen for your part. So it is a cold, gray, and snowy day in Spanish. At 10:30 a.m. on Tuesday, February 18th, this just happened, Marnie Long, where's Marnie Long? Marnie Long's
Marnie Long's
online.
online.
Hi, Marnie. Marnie Long, a well-known compulsive chronic complainer, telephoned Counselor Adams. Okay. A first-time counselor. Marnie was very upset. She told Counselor Adams that the snowplow had just gone by and left a mountain of snow in front of her driveway, and that her garbage can was hit with the contents being strewn all over the yard. Marnie demanded that Counselor Adams get the snowplow driver to come back and clean up the garbage, as well as the mound of snow, immediately. She also reported to Counselor Adams that Johnny Dogood was the driver, and that she recognized him by his crooked nose. Counselor Adams asked if she had phoned the municipal works superintendent. Where's the municipal works superintendent? Okay. Counselor Adams asked if she had phoned the municipal works superintendent or the CAO. And Mrs. Long stated no, that she had made many calls to the municipality and nothing ever happened. He then asked if she could get out of her driveway and was advised that she couldn't even see the road. Counselor Adams said, "Leave it with me, I will take care of it." Counselor Adams went to speak with Johnny Dogood. Johnny denied that he hit the garbage can or left the mound of snow. But Counselor Adams refused to believe Johnny or let him speak any further and demanded that he go and clean up the mess immediately. Counselor Adams yelled and threatened to report Johnny to council. Johnny went to Marnie Long's place, cleaned up the garbage and the snow in front of the driveway. Counselor Adams then called his good friend on council, Marjorie Smith. Marjorie here today?
No.
Marjorie's not here today. And told her the story, but did not disclose his conversation with Johnny at 12:15 p.m. the same day. Counselor Smith then called Counselor Joe Martin at 3:40 p.m., who then called Counselor Brown at 8:15 p.m. Counselor Brown called Mayor Green at 9:30 a.m. the following day, reporting that Johnny had cleaned Marnie Long's driveway and that the residents on Maple Lane, where Marnie lived, were complaining why the windrow was cleaned only at her driveway. The mayor called the CAO at 10:45 a.m. on February 19th, that's tomorrow. Johnny took pictures of the situation. He had not been at work when the incident occurred. It was not yet garbage day. Garbage is actually collected on Friday. And he had a family to feed, but was afraid that council would fire him. Johnny was formally reprimanded by his foreman and the manager of public works because he had been given instruction to clean the entrance to the landfill, which was to open at 11 a.m., and it had not been completed. They did not accept his claim that Counselor Adams had demanded he go and pick up the garbage and remove the snow at Marnie Long's. The CAO called the manager of public works, who advised that Johnny had been reprimanded for no cleaning the entrance of the landfill, but that Johnny could not have hit Marnie Long's garbage or left a windrow with the plow since he was on vacation and had only returned that morning. Marnie Long lives at the bottom of a hill and would not be able to see the road even if there was no snow. That's the story. Now what?
Okay, so now you all have your role, and we're asking the question, whose role is it anyway? So you have to think back over the story, and you're in your persona. So you have to think about, okay, so what did you do in this story? What did you do? What should you have done? And what would you do differently if you had known all the facts?
So what did you do? What should you have done? And what would you do different? And if anybody needs me to give them their update, let me know. How long have you been?
So we should give everyone, what, 5 minutes? A little bit more?
I think a little bit. This is big.
So we went to, yeah, we went to, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you don't go to
Easy one. Anything else? Do you disagree?
Okay. They said that the mayor's role is easy.
Is it? I don't think so.
10:45 a.m.
Councilor Brown calls mayor.
So we cover all our bases. That's right. Yeah, I told him. No, never. I go through his office. Yes. Believe it or not. I know.
Here's a number. Yeah, 2 minutes.
Yeah. When they asked the CEO for the treasurer.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bryn's gonna hurt, man. She's done all of this.
Yep.
That's right.
Yeah, not just have the clerk.
Yes.
Counselor, but have Should he have joined minority council? Round instead of advisory.
All right, I think everybody's done. Is our online done, Peggy?
Just about. I think we've got some good conversation here.
Okay. So we can take it up.
We can take it up, yes, as soon as you're ready.
What order are we going to do it in?
I think you should,
Or can we just do it?
whatever way you feel it.
Well, we'll just start. We'll just go through. Okay, guys. So I'm just going to go through and call out names, starting with where's Marnie Long?
Marnie Long is online.
Marnie Long is online, always. Obviously. So what does Marnie Long say we ought to do?
Okay, so Marnie Long, it's a little bit of a challenge because I have to go back and read through. Okay, so Marnie Long should never have complained to the council member in the first place. She should have followed the municipality's complaint policy, but there is some thought that because she was a chronic complainer and didn't get any results from probably following the complaints policy in the first place, that she then went to Councillor Adams in the likely event that Councillor Adams would not know any better and would help her out. The other thing...
Ratepayers don't do that.
And then I asked the question about her story and about that. They said, well, you know, basically, yeah, she obviously embellished her story. And everyone has snowbanks when the grader goes by, so she wasn't anybody special. And her garbage can, if it got damaged, was too close to the road. And yeah, I'm just going through, so the last comments are basically that council should never approach CAOs, but that's not really Marnie's piece in this. It's just another comment that's made here. Okay, so that's Marnie. Marnie should have followed the policy, the
Okay,
complaint policy.
okay. So the next character is Councillor Adams, the first-time councillor. Where is Councillor Adams? Aha, that's cool. Okay, staff people, what should Councillor Adams have done?
Just for clarification, Peggy, could you say that they said that the council should never approach the CAO?
No,
Okay.
no, the
Sorry, I thought
staff.
you did.
Sorry if I did, I meant the staff.
Okay.
Yeah, I was reading different. I was reading different levels here.
So we said what they did wrong was went directly to the employee and gave directions, or we acted outside of our role. Should have reported to the CAO, and possibly should have attended the council training that was offered.
Nice little fun.
So, for Councillor Adams, is that it? Are you done?
Mhm.
So, one of the things we definitely see with folks in Councillor Adams' position is that they are vulnerable because they're a first-time councillor. They are vulnerable to ratepayers, and so this is important for heads of council and for senior staff to particularly help and guide first-time councillors, specifically all councillors generally, but that this could happen to you. and that you could get sucked into a complaint process. And so if you get a complaint, here's what you do with it. So Councillor Adams, I agree, went outside of their role. Had there been problems with what the staff person was doing, Councillor Adams stepped outside of the 448 protection because council doesn't have the authority to direct individual staff members. I see it happen not infrequently, and it is something that causes litigation for councillors when they start directing staff. One of the advantages to going to the CAO, and depending on what your municipality's staff council relations policy says, some let council go to the head of the department. Their complaint policy actually says that that's how they do that. And that way you're talking to a staff person who has knowledge of the municipal system as opposed to a specific issue. And so going to the person with the overarching knowledge and responsibility is really the quickest way to solve the problem. The story's gone. So next we have Johnny Dogood. So what? Tell me about Johnny Dogood. What would poor old Johnny Dogood have done different?
He probably should have called his work supervisor and the counselor to set up a meeting to clarify the situation and what really happened.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. The reality of staff sometimes, that's ideally what they would do, is go to the supervisor and say, okay, I'm getting direction from Councillor Adams, but you told me to go and do the landfill. What should I do? And then probably the supervisor would have helped out. Some staff, and many staff, don't like to say no to councillors. And that's something for councillors to keep in mind, that staff, regardless of what level they are at, they don't want to say no to you. So be very careful about what you're asking them to do, because you could be putting the municipality and yourself and the staff person offside. And this poor Johnny Dogood tried to do and did, frankly, what a lot of staff people do, particularly staff people at a lower level in the organization. They often will follow what councillors tell them to do, and that can be problematic. So what else about Johnny Dogood? Anything else there? Well, something else that I think would have been helpful for Johnny and the whole system is to have some note-taking practices, so that Johnny could demonstrate, even if he doesn't really have the skill to advocate for himself, that there's a log about what he was doing, what he was assigned to do, and when, so that there'd be some empirical proof to say, well, it couldn't have been me because I wasn't on the plow that day.
GPS in your plow truck.
GPS in the plow trucks, and we'll get to more GPS, and if we don't, remind me about GPS, because I do like it. It's gone again. So, superintendent, sorry, Lynn?
So you indicated that Johnny Dogood's first level of defense was not necessarily to talk to his supervisor?
Oh no, I think immediately he should have talked to a supervisor. And I think we should be empowering our staff to say, look, if everything's going fine, good. But as soon as something starts to go weird, go to your supervisor. And weird might be a problem with the truck, or it might be a problem with a ratepayer, or a ratepayer's dog, or a counselor. But first, they should be really comfortable going to their supervisor and saying, help me with this situation.
I have something else I want to add to that as well, Paul, because I think that frontline workers need to have some kind of conflict resolution skills or customer service type skills, so that they know how to deal with Councillor Adams when Councillor Adams comes and is in their face. It's one thing when they're on the telephone, you can maybe buy some time, but when you've got a councillor standing in front of you saying, get in that snowplow, go and fix that problem, you need to be able to have a way to calm them down in a way that's safe for everybody. And we don't train our staff with those kind of skills. And I've been seeing it more and more often. So that I have we've been actually working on a program for staff to have some of this kind of training.
And ironically, you might get a tool today.
We might.
Could you not, because of what you said about taking notes, could you not have something in the trucks, like an incident report or something that you would bring on a clipboard and say, you know what, I can't solve it now, but let me take down all your information and I'll go back to my supervisor so we have the information. Wouldn't that kind of de-escalate the situation?
Definitely a process for how you deal with it, whether it's a clipboard,
Right, or
whether it's
whatever, yeah.
whether it's a referral.
Voice recorded on your
Yeah.
app, on your phone, if you don't have the opportunity to write.
Well, and I guess I'll go to Lynn's idea about the GPS. One of the things that I saw, sorry?
I need to pass my phone home.
One of the things that I saw that I thought I was really taken by in Kirkland Lake is they actually hooked up their complaint policy to their GIS system. And so they've got it all computerized so that when a complaint comes into the municipality, it gets tagged about when it came in, date, also where it came from. And what that does, that Wilf was telling me about it, and they had one of the first snowstorms in a year, and all of a sudden a subdivision lit up red. Everybody was complaining because they could see it on the screen and realize that Mrs. Smith and Mrs. Jones and Mr. whatever are all from the same street. They realized immediately, holy crap, that street didn't get plowed. And they were able to go to the public works superintendent, and they looked at it and realized they forgot to put this subdivision on the snowplow route. So because it was tied into their GIS, they were able to see the geographic location of all of the complaints. That trend was really useful for delivering service. It also has a log system so that you know who's working on the complaint, when it's resolved, and how it's resolved. So that if Marnie is saying, no, I call all the time and I don't get any response, then you can look at the system and say, well, actually you didn't call, or you didn't call who you're supposed to call, or yes, you did and it was resolved within 20 minutes. Or yes, you've called and it hasn't been resolved and now we need to figure out why. The reality is that complaints are how the ratepayers talk to us. And that's how we get feedback as a municipality. And a lot of times the ratepayers are upset about it. With this GIS system, another thing that happened, which could have helped Councillor Adams, is they had an individual who would call various people and make complaints. Before this system, nobody would have put them together, but all of a sudden they saw that this one person was making a complaint to the building department, a complaint to the public works department, and a complaint to 3 different councillors. And they realized that the lady was in actually a mental health crisis, and they were able to send a team to go and help her. So that was something else that the GIS complaint system triggered, that if you didn't have that, you probably wouldn't notice, because she was going to all sorts of different people. And until they put it all together, they didn't realize the type of problem they were dealing with. So that's something that I really like the GIS for.
Well, for us, it's the complaint that we get sometimes is they're driving too fast.
Oh,
So the GPS can log time,
Mm.
speed, location, all that kind of stuff.
Excellent.
So it's a way for us also to protect our staff. You get these calls, you come down whatever street going like a bat out of hell and the snow is flying and
Yeah.
did damage to the whatever. So I
So
can contact my road super and he can give me the exact information of GPS, when they were there, how fast they were going.
the other thing that I'm thinking about in our service delivery is changing first of all, having a process for dealing with complaints, but changing it from a complaint policy to a feedback policy, in a manner to try to get people to say, okay, it's okay for me to call. I don't have to be pissed off before they're
Our
going to
form is
listen to
called
me.
inquiry, not complaint.
Yeah, but calling it, like, complaint has a negative aspect to it, and we need information from the ratepayers in order to provide information.
Or to make things better.
Yeah, the other thing that Will explained to me, and he tracked it on his system. He had a counselor who didn't follow the rules, and I can't remember the complaint. It was either garbage or snow plowing. So the counselor got a phone call from whomever, goes to their house, sits down with them, has a cup of tea, listens to the complaint, goes to the guy on the garbage truck, talks to the guy on the garbage truck, says, you didn't pick up Mrs. So-and-so's garbage. The guy on the garbage truck is probably not all that helpful, but at the end of the day says, okay, let's go talk to the supervisor. Goes to talk to the supervisor. Supervisor does the log thing and says, well, they went by. I don't know why they wouldn't have picked it up, and starts looking into it. So what Will discovered was that process took about 4 or 5 hours before the complaint or the request for service was actually given to somebody that could do something about it. So that's another reason why it's really better for counselors not to deal with the complaint itself, but to refer it to the complaint process so that it can more quickly get actioned. So you get better service that way. And
How do you educate your ratepayers on who they call?
wonderful question. Do I answer
No,
that?
you're already jumping ahead.
I'm jumping ahead. Remember your question, and if you don't get an answer by the end of the day, we've completely failed. Your worship, I'm sorry I jumped on you.
Staff for training. Back in the late 90s, it was Discovery North out of Elliott Lake used to give out the customer service course. And I was chair of the organization at the time. But we did it at the hospital in Sioux because they had issues, customer service with all the nurses and staff. And we did, I believe, the hospitals at Blind River and Elliott Lake. We did also a lot of the hotels. So that was part of the course. The course already exists. Marie Murphy-Foran from Elliott Lake would have all those details, and she was qualified to give the courses back in those years, but she still lives in Elliott Lake. The Discovery North, it doesn't exist anymore because different strategies and funding came apart for that type of courses. But there was Smart Serve, there was customer service, and all different levels of it. So for staff, that would be very good because I've run into that issue with some of our staff where customer service would be very, very, very good, where somebody complained about the road being rough and all that. They said, well, take the air out of your tires and they won't feel so rough. That did not go over very well. So in that case, customer service would be, say, okay, well, how do you deal with a customer? I was raised in a grocery store and in a store. The customer's always right. There's always a right answer. There's always something to be able to relieve this situation, and being customers become happy. Well, something's going to be done about it, but then you follow up on something. So just how do you deal with it?
Yeah.
The ratepayer is the customer. The ratepayer pays your salary, pays the taxes, and you got to realize that the ratepayer in front of you is making your salary, is paying your salary.
Yes.
That concept thing is, how do I keep that ratepayer satisfied or happy that something's going to be done?
So I want to talk about that more as we go through the presentation, because I think I agree with you about 80%. I agree with you about 80%. There are some things that I think that might be really overstating what it is that we do as a municipality. But I think the idea of dealing with customers and dealing with conflict is something that we definitely need to help staff with.
Next player.
Okay.
So we've done
It
Marty.
is
We've done Councillor Adams.
done
and
Councillor Adams.
Johnny Dogood.
Johnny Dogood. Marjorie Smith isn't here.
No.
Neither's Joe Martin.
Nope.
Brown. Mayor Green. Where's Mayor Green? Okay, Mayor Green. Do you like the sound of that? Mayor Green. What are your observations from this?
I actually didn't do that on purpose.
I should have given it to her too. So at 10:45, when the mayor called the clerk CAO, he or she did the right thing. Should have asked, carried it a little bit further, should have asked the clerk to contact the other councillors to discuss what their role should have been based on Section 224 of the Municipal Act. Reiterate the role of council. I mean, that's a lot. That's like a follow-up to it. Probably do the clerk and staff a little bit of a training thing with council, even though she's probably already done the council training and all that sort of stuff. We're now, it's in year 2 of a new councilor's role. Reiterate role of council based on section 224, and to take it a step further and piggying into this, maybe do some training with staff as well in regard to how to handle councilors, especially new ones when they're in that type of situation. Something to do down the road. That was basically our observation. Unfortunately, the mayor didn't get the call until the next morning. Depending on the size of the municipality, I'm guessing, based on our size, all that probably would have happened much quicker rather than not till the next day, but in this particular situation, that was the timeline.
Yeah, I think there's a really good leadership opportunity here for Mayor Green to debrief the situation at a council meeting and ensure that everybody understands what the policies that are applicable say. And if there are changes that need to be made to the policies, that council receives and considers those, and kind of try to get the ship back moving in the right direction. Really use this as a learning opportunity. And then we have CAO, the Public Works Superintendent. Oops. CAO is overall responsible, so we'll go to the Public Works Superintendent.
But you're good.
Okay, so what were the 3 things you asked us to do in our position for this?
Tell us what you did, tell us what you should have done, and what you might do different. It's really
Okay.
Mhm.
So we recommended Johnny Duguid. We should have asked the CAO for information at the very least before we did that in our capacity as supervisor to get all of the pieces. So we recommended someone before we even knew that they weren't at work, et cetera, et cetera. So we should have gone to the CAO or the clerk first to get all of the information before we dealt with that. In the future, we would also talk to all of the staff to let them know if they have a request that they let people know it has to go through the supervisor first before they go out and do anything. So that would have been part of the response. I'm sorry, I can't do anything without supervisor's direction. So I have to run this by my supervisor.
Okay.
And some conflict pieces, just, yes, I hear your concern, I'll bring it forth to my supervisor.
Yeah.
I want to question you guys though, because the foreman and his supervisor didn't believe Johnny. So they punished Johnny, they disciplined Johnny because they didn't believe his story. He was expected to be in a place doing a job.
Why don't they know he's on vacation?
Well, no, he was on vacation for Mrs. Long's piece. He was there that day, was supposed to go and plow the landfill opening.
Yeah.
And he said, well, Councillor Adams told me to go and do this, so I went and did it. And they don't believe that Councillor Adams went to talk to him.
Well, they still should have gone to get all of the information before making that decision. So the clerk or CAO would have had that information, right?
Actually, where I was going with it is the municipal works foreman is managing the superintendent, the road superintendent, whatever the top position is, that's their responsibility. So even though there's a CAO, they still have authority to discipline and manage their employees who work under them.
Yeah.
But what the foreman should have done was go to the municipal works supervisor, the big boss, with an investigation that had been done before they disciplined Johnny. They should have got the information. They should have been doing an investigation. And why this is important is it does happen within the staff circles, but it often happens at the council table. So councillors get a complaint about And I watched this happen. I was at a council meeting where a ratepayer came in, was angry because they had left this big mound of snow at her driveway. And she yelled and screamed at staff in a council meeting, and the mayor didn't shut it down. And she was angry, and she was going to sue, and she was going to do all of these things. So it would be no different than if it was talking to Councillor Adams, right? She could have been that same way with him. And then Councillor at this table said, well, did you discipline the staff? It's like, that's, first of all, not council's business. Second of all, the very first thing that needs to be done is what's true and what's not true here. There's a fact and a fiction. And unless you have an investigation into what happened, you shouldn't jump the gun. So that's where I was going with that whole piece with
All the rest of
the rest of the story. Yeah, yes.
So I mean, that's a great point, and a learning part of the story is that before there's any discipline, there has to be an investigation. That is an unalterable rule. One of the things that I was interested in what you said is tell the ratepayer I can't do this without getting supervisors' position. That triggered me to think it'd be good to have a bit of a script for the frontline staff, because you really don't want them telling ratepayers they can't do something, as much as saying, okay, here's how we can solve the problem. Let's go talk to the supervisor. Now, obviously, they're not going to get out of the snowplow and go and talk to the supervisor, but if you give them the tool to say, okay, tell you what, I'm happy to help, but give my supervisor a call and they'll figure out how to schedule it. If you give them the option, rather than tell them what you can't do, you're going to reduce the conflict emotion.
And you know, Paul, that's really good because you don't think of it for a roads department, a script. Like I have a script in the municipal office when people come in and complain about MPAC and why my taxes go up or why is my assessment. We have a little script that everybody knows to go explain to them the process of how tax bills are run and the assessment, you know, the assessed value comes from MPAC, but you don't think of it for your roads department.
Yeah. And the front line are
They get-
really the ones
They
that
get
get
it the
hammered.
most. They get it the
They're out
most.
there and they're
And even students, and like, it does, we are seeing a bit of a disturbing trend. And I don't know if it's that we're noticing it now or if it's happening more often, but we are seeing people really aggressive. I don't mean physically necessarily, but just really aggressive with staff.
almost like their expectation is so
Well, I've had to
high.
do trespass notices and things where we are worried about safety, and that's not okay. And that actually is where I was going with your idea that the customer is always right. Because the customer has no right to abuse staff or members of council. And you do have, as council, you've got an obligation to ensure that your staff are protected from that. And they can be frustrated and upset, but you're not the grocery store. You're a level of government. And you wouldn't expect that they're going to go and ream people out at the provincial legislature or in the House of Commons like that. So we need to remember that we are a level of government. And frankly, they do what we tell them to do, not the other way around. We do want engagement, we do want ideas, and I'm jumping way too far ahead,
Well,
right?
you are, absolutely. And we need to move on to the CAO
Okay.
because otherwise we're
Okay.
not going to get through all
Where's
our
our CAO?
slides.
Oh, well. Okay, so the CAO really should have had a lot of education for staff and council so that these things don't happen, right? So- And the public, yes, and the public, because the public thinks that they can do these things. Council thinks, and I've been in that thing at the beginning too, where people phone me at home and, you know, and whatever, and I said to one person in particular, I said, you know, it's fine, you wanna tell me something, I can kind of mention these things, but there's a process, right? So if you would go to the office, and Angel will help you, we call it a complaint book, and, you know, write it out and whatever. Well, a lot of times they don't want to put their name on something, they like somebody to do the. I didn't want to use that term, but anyways, yes. So, and two, because one counselor took a complaint that counselor also had in a council meeting by phoning all these other counselors, right?
Mhm.
Yes.
Yep.
And that shouldn't happen, right? You need to bring that to a table.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, that is something that we've seen the ombudsman cracking down on, or what they call serial meetings, either by telephone, in person, or by email. And the ombudsman's website actually is a bit confusing because they say you can't have a meeting by email. What they mean is you may not have a meeting by email, but you could, and end up
Yes.
offside. And I've had a municipal council criticized about that. So you're right. Lots of role here, both I think for the head of council and the CAO, to say, okay, we had this event. We need to figure out how we're going to deal with it in the future, because obviously there's a failure in education all the way around, from the ratepayer to the public works superintendent. So this is one where the CAO needs to say, wait, before you send that discipline letter, we need to.
CAO might not have even been alerted to the
That's
discipline
right.
letter, which is what I
Yes.
was getting to. And so I will get to you in a second. And I just wanted to say something about the CAO's role in this. The CAO should have also looked at the complaints policy, and if it wasn't working, take it back to council and say, hey, wait a minute,
Yeah.
this isn't working. Can we change the policy? And I think that's something we don't do often enough when we're in our offices and we deal with these policies all the time. And I love the story Paul tells when we're doing council orientation about him going into a municipality and the clerk saying, oh, well, we have that bylaw, but I tell council not to use it or not to
Oh my
follow
God.
it because it's illegal. And it's like, really? You have a policy that's illegal? And I know municipalities the staff are often overworked, but this is your time, when you have a red flag that there's a situation like this, it's time to look at the policy. That's where it all stems from. So, Lynn has a comment first.
Just getting back to poor old Johnny Dogood. I really think that he should appeal his discipline.
Absolutely. I was wondering if you would come up with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I wanted to wait until I heard all
the other
answers, 'cause
stories.
the answers may have
Yeah.
been somewhere along that process
Yeah.
that they took away his discipline. But it didn't
No.
appear that anyone wanted to take away his discipline.
Yeah.
Because
So
that
he definitely should.
that disciplinary letter probably would have went in his personality.
Absolutely.
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 Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
a black mark that he
Well,
really doesn't
and-
need.
And the red flags in here are things like the fact that they didn't believe Johnny Dogood. So
Yes.
this is Johnny Dogood is often the kind of person that we would get workplace harassment complaints from,
Absolutely.
because he's always getting disciplined or things are happening and he's doing a perfectly good job. But often Johnny Dogood's the one running to a council member, which was the other piece I was going to put in the story, was that Johnny then ran to a different council person and cried the blues because he did this and now he's in trouble. So, you almost ready? Oh, okay. Is it lunchtime already? Okay.
Hard to understand what Tanya's thinking.
Yeah, so the idea of the discipline, absolutely, he should appeal that decision.
He shouldn't get an opportunity to appeal the decision, because the CAO and the superintendent should have said, hey, wait.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that Johnny Dogood could have gone to the CAO, which is the other thing I had thought about when I was doing the scenario, was the fact that he got disciplined. His supervisors didn't believe him. He could have then gone to the CAO and so there was lots of variables in this little story, and when I wrote it, it's all based on things I've experienced in the past couple of years working with municipalities.
One of the things that I think would be really helpful in a situation like this, and this is going to be good for CAOs and clerks and heads of council, is to do a debrief when something like this happens. Because whether we as the municipality behave properly or not, there's a real learning opportunity here. And so this is particularly where staff, as Peggy says, can bring advice to council to say, okay, this system isn't working, we need to change it, or further education or what have you, because when something like this happens, then we can do some learning and figure out how to deal with all of the aspects of it, including the ratepayer.
And Paul, when you talk about crisis intervention, like after emergencies or whatever, you do all the
Yeah.
things. Like, why does it only have to be on a crisis? crisis. This could be considered a mini crisis, still go through the same process. But what it comes down to is time. You deal with it, you move on, and then you've got 50 million other things to work on, and you never ever, it's like everything else we do in the office, every file I talk about, you get it done, whether it's a grant or whatever, you get the project done, you put the file away, and you never get to close it off because you don't have time, you want to the next thing. So all these little mini crises that happen, if you could close them off properly and utilize it as a learning tool, things like that wouldn't happen again.
And I think that's a really good point, Lynn, because the idea of the crisis, and they are crises, regardless of the size or the magnitude, however you want to look at it, this is still a crisis because poor Johnny Good's been disciplined, and now Councillor Adams has created this whole whirlwind.
Yes.
And you can imagine what the community is now saying. I didn't even get the public involved in this process, other than the phone call, right? The issue is that if you deal with it, and you deal with it when it happens, and you give the staff the tools and council the tools at that point in time, hopefully it'll prevent the next one. And when you don't do it, it's 3 months later when you have that next one that you go, oh yeah, I probably should do something about that. And then it gets buried. And so it's about taking time and really thinking about these things.
Confidence that
Yeah.
things are going to be done.
Exactly.
And so, to your point, Lynn, I mean, maybe today is the opportunity to say, okay, we're going to start doing debriefs, and we're gonna schedule it somehow. If you have a
Breakfast meeting at 8 o'clock.
or if you have a breakfast meeting, or like, just because this happens every day, and so being able to take the knowledge that you're given and capitalize on that opportunity is going to help the organization work better. Mary Lynn?
We do that every morning. I do that every morning. As soon as I come in at 9 o'clock, we all meet and we all discuss things that are going on, things we want to get done, how we feel. I don't know, to me, it's an important part of our mental health and our working together as a team, because that's where we spend most of our time,
Sure,
unfortunately.
sure. It's an organizational debrief that's necessary here, though, because
Yeah, it's not just staff.
you
right?
either in this situation, we either need policy change or we need education, or probably both.
And some leadership.
And so it isn't just staff.
Yeah.
So this is where it's important for senior staff to speak with the head of council, do a debrief, do a report, and probably put it on the council table for, okay, council, how do you want us to deal with these issues in the future? Because, this could have gone worse.
So how do you deal with this in small community? Because it's like a grass fire.
Yeah.
You can debrief and you can have 2 or 3 meetings, and your council meeting was yesterday, and the next council meeting's 2 weeks away, when you have it all to council. By the time you have that next council, you've got 2 other crises that have taken place in between. That first one, you can't, and we don't have the availability of notifying our public when we make those kind of decisions. We make decisions at council meetings, and even that is a very difficult time to get that information out of your public. I mean, your public is who we work for, but they get all these preconceived notions out there because it's so long in between everything happening. And it's very difficult. I mean, coffee shop talk kills you.
Yes.
You are,
I mean, that's
and social
Bottom
media.
line is they don't get the
And social
information.
You don't get the right
from where
information.
they
You
need to
get the information,
Yeah.
part-time stories, and the rest of it they make up because this is how the municipality operates, which is totally inaccurate
We're going to get
The
into that
coffee
in
shops
public
kill you.
engagement.
on those outside discussions. Because you meet every couple of weeks, the rumors out there, the stories out there, and you can't tell a person that that's not correct. Oh my God, no, Mary said that. No, seriously.
Yeah, you're right.
It's true.
You're
That's the reality of
100%
what we
right.
do.
So again, you're probably going to get a tool, maybe not the complete answer, by the end of the presentation today.
Okay, so Melody has a question, and let's move on.
Okay, Melody.
So that's a very good point in the training. It's called accountability and transparency. So I think some of these pieces would be good. That's the communication piece with our constituents. If we had our meetings or whatever posted online like you're doing, you're recording them and they can see. So if you have a debrief session, it's not just about that incident, it's about our procedure that needs to be addressed. So if you have the debrief thing and you're changing the procedure so it helps, so this is what we put in place now, they know, oh, the supervisor has to do this, this is what we put in place, they'll have a lot more information. I like the whole idea of this piece because it educates your constituents. So when Elliott Lake went to having their meetings recorded and you can watch them on whatever, they engaged a ton of the public and they're much more educated on some of the pieces. Just my thoughts.
And those are really good
Transparency.
comments, and I'm just gonna, Natalie has a comment here from online. She says, but if these policies are on, and this is available on your website, you still need to educate the public that it's there. And that's because they'll still coffee shop talk, right? That, I don't know that you're gonna end that, but I think that the reality is if council stops buying into what they're hearing on the streets about how poorly their staff are performing, then they will be able to say, yeah, that you're entitled to your opinion. I'm sorry you feel that way. However, we've done our homework. We know that our staff are doing what we've asked them to do through our policies. And that's where I'm hoping we're going to get to by the end of today. Yes, so that's kind of going to move us into the next piece, Paul, because I'm getting a little bit concerned about time.
That we wouldn't have enough.
Well, I always worry that we don't have enough staff.
So you've probably seen this before. And we've already largely talked about it, but counselor's role is not as a customer service rep. Counselors definitely want to solve the problems, but individually they don't have the ability to solve problems. That's not to say that they shouldn't talk to ratepayers. They should talk to ratepayers, and certainly if there are themes that they're hearing from ratepayers, then bring something from a policy perspective to the table about changes that need to be made. Certainly counselors should be talking to ratepayers, and as Peter Kenyon says, they shouldn't talk to the ratepayers that are their friends. I mean, don't say don't talk to your friends, but your role is to engage the public, which is the whole population. So go and talk to the people that didn't vote for you. Talk to the people that are not in your circle, in order to get access to the rest of the organization. Sorry, the rest of the community, including talking to young people. There's Peter's. If you've seen Peter's stories, the initiatives that come out of municipalities that engage their young people are really remarkable. So what I wanted to sort of point out on this slide today, although you've probably seen it, is that where counselors get involved in solving a complaint, there's no record of the process if they solve it themselves. And it's also not in keeping with the concepts of accountability and transparency. We're going to discuss what that means. Okay, engaging citizens. So further with Peter, he says that our job is to govern of the people and by the people. And one of the things to keep in mind is that as a local government, our obligation is to make decisions that are in the best interest of the municipality. It says that in the Act. But what does that mean? It's not defined in the Act. And so things that we think are important to keep in mind when you're making decisions in the best interest of the municipality. First of all, what's your legal authority for the decision? I think that really should be in almost every staff report, so that you understand that staff have thought about it and that you're making a decision that you do have the jurisdiction to make. Fact versus perception with respect to the idea of an investigation and coffee shop talk. You know, there is tons of perception out there, and certainly in the days of social media, perception runs rampant and it becomes reality. But it's council's role to ensure, and staff's role to ensure that council has the actual facts when they're making decisions. Thinking about impact and risk for the municipality is important. One of the things that I like to do in council orientation is ask the new councilors, what's the population of the municipality? And some of my municipal clients have actually put that number on the wall in council chambers, so that council is reminded every decision they make, hey, we're affecting 300 people or we're affecting 10,000 people. Not only the 3 people that are in front of us right now. And we need to think about, okay, these people are very vocal and this is a very important issue for them. But how does a decision on that issue affect the rest of the municipality? And what's the risk? I mean, this story that Peggy wrote was interesting because the risk is that the people on Maple Lane are now saying, well, why didn't you clean my driveway?
Council.
And so that the impact of that decision wasn't considered. Result, meaning what is the end result of the decision that you're going to do? What's the result you're trying to achieve? And then we've already talked about the value, and I frankly haven't seen very many municipalities do this, and I think because we don't have time, but evaluation and debrief of our decisions. It's a tool that's there for us, and I think if we're conscious of it and try to work it in, it can be a really helpful tool. And I have an idea about how to work it in. Next challenge.
So the next challenge, this time what I would like is I would like council on one side, members of council on one side of the room, and I think the majority are over here, so it's probably easier for the others to move over, and staff on this side of the room, please.
Nobody walked.
And what?
And nobody walked between.
Yeah, yeah. It's a hard line between council and staff, yeah.
Want to get this exercise done before lunch?
Yes. We're gonna have a quick break. We'll have to remove some of our challenges. We won't have enough time. Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. It's working. Okay, so for challenge number 2, we are going to come up with a way to best measure standard way to measure what is the best interest of the municipality. So I want you to put your thinking caps on and how would you measure what is in the best interest of the municipality? And you have 3 minutes.
Because lunch is.
Always seems to be great.
Are they really?
You just go fast again.
Where did you apply? So first you have to find legislation.
Yeah, it is. I know. That's why I'm like,
We're going to do just talk about
So
it's not
I guess in respect
well, I
to
guess we
the
could go around and like starting, right?
I guess that would be legislation.
Yeah, I'm just worried about time because you're like starting and okay, so for those of you who are online, do you have any ideas on how to measure the best interest of the municipality?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, if they know what's going to cost to make that decision, so that they know.
Yeah.
What's the cost? Like, what would be the cost?
Mhm.
Make the decision for that. Sure, the cost may be high, but it's service. It's something that you would trade off, right? So it's, that's the first step.
Yeah, that's part of. How does it affect service delivery? Financial, go figure you would bring up money there. Governance, financial.
And you have service
I always say, how do we become a fire prevention officer?
So do you know how you're going to bring this one up?
How do you manage being a fire prevention officer rather than a fireman? Fireman is always reacting to something.
Yes.
Your fire prevention, you're avoiding something.
Yes.
Or you're trying to.
Yeah, so you don't get into that.
It's all the different pieces.
Yeah, there is HR
Yeah.
there.
Is to
There is HR.
consider it actively.
Because then you're helping out
Correct.
towards getting up. This
Correct.
was so unlikely,
That was
helping out, putting in, example. I know, make my
Natalie was saying easier if we would give them a topic.
There's more than the grade.
I want to build a tool someday. I'm going to build a decision-making matrix.
Yeah.
For this kind of process.
Oh.
Everything municipality does is fall under some section of this matter.
Yes.
No, but that's the back of it. Everything.
So broad.
And
You're looking at so much stuff.
Financial build your also costs investment.
Right.
Like you don't have this, just like we talked about, you only got enough finances to do something. So you're behind a number of,
Money and then we.
you have to decide
Yeah.
where you're gonna live for the dollar value that you spend.
Yeah.
You
But then that's
put
what you,
aside
but you find out the money first, and then you our side, you know.
Partial distance.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's the other priority, number one priority, that's kind of your strategic planning, your capital asset plan.
Yes, prioritize things to be insurance delivery, financial impact. Based on.
Staff done?
I'm going to tell a story before you do that piece.
So you're gonna go first. Is that what- okay. You guys have the.
Short sweet, they think they have the answer to it all. That's why we're on this.
You guys ready?
They're politicians, of course they're ready.
Okay, Peggy's gonna start this.
Okay, so I want to know, at a council meeting, at some point in time in your careers being either a staff person or a member of council, have you ever experienced where a ratepayer or a small group of ratepayers comes in and is very demanding of council, and council passes a bylaw or resolution to help those ratepayers, only to somewhere after that date decide, that was the wrong decision, let's change our decision?
Usually.
Not
She
yet.
said, have you ever?
Yeah.
Not usually.
No, I don't think that's ever happened in my municipality, not to my recollection.
Well, I have to tell you a little story about a municipality that I was in, and Paul and I were doing some work in, and you go into the council meeting, you sit there and you'd give them your advice and you'd have the conversation with them, and then you'd leave. The next day, they would call a special emergency meeting and reverse every single decision that they'd made, because they were terrified of the decision that they were making, and they were concerned, and someone else changed their mind because they got a little bit more information. And this is something I have seen. I mean, that's an extreme example, but I have seen this happen often, where council will make a decision because they have this much information from a group of ratepayers, but staff have not had time to prepare a staff report, and then you find out that you probably can't do what the ratepayer is asking after you've made the promise or council's passed the resolution to do it, or that it's not in the best interest of the municipality. Was working with a community where they had a group of ratepayers that instead of having the one chronic complainer, this is a group of chronic complainers, and one of the people was sending 300 emails in a period of a year to one staff member. That's not all of the rest of them, and that's not all of council. And all of this group was like that, and they were methodical in how they were attacking staff and council and the process. And so council decided they were going to have a meeting with this group. But then when they realized, hey, this is not going to solve our problem, it's not in the best interest of the municipality to have this meeting, they've now had to go back and rescind this resolution. But now they're concerned about doing that because this group is like a mob now, and they've created a whole ruckus within and in the municipality about this expectation and demanding to have this meeting. So it was just an interesting way to look at it. And so now I'll let you take over and talk about.
Staff's going to give their advice after council makes a decision. So council, what's the best interest of the municipality? How do you decide? How do you measure it?
Risk management. All the different sectors of risk management, asset management, strategic planning, all those planning processes go together to make your decision. And if you do a proper risk management of any decision that council makes, you're probably on the right track.
Okay, so I'm going to play devil's advocate. What's in your risk management equation? What's in the risk management equation? Risk management, there's an equation.
So you would have governance,
That's where you go to your staff.
HR.
So what kind of information do you want from your staff?
What will this do for us? What will it do against us? What will it do if we don't do it? And I think part of what we have to make in small rural municipalities is where do we put the dollar to the best value? What are we not going to be able to do what we want to do? Because there's only so much money. And every time, like Paul indicated earlier in our conversation, you're as a municipality, you're behind in the number of procedures that you need to do. You need to prioritize which ones you need to do and what money you have to do those. And maybe you have to do a plan over 5 years to strategic plan to do others, but you can only do the ones that you can afford to do, that you're doing, that you can actually do that time. And part of that risk management is asking the staff, which are the most important ones that we're not doing, which are the ones that puts us in the most risk of not being able to be in the right position. That's all part of that municipal process that you have to go through. And staff are a very big part of that because they're the ones that really know and understand what the municipality does. We're there to make decisions, but we make decisions based on the best information that we're given. Best information that you're given is given to you by your staff.
At that point in time. That's the other trick.
Oh yeah, there's another.
Yeah, there's always those disclaimers.
There's the next day something totally different.
It could happen, absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
So usually there's levels in a risk management plan. So it's proactive, really. It's good because as you're saying, level 1 might be you have this in place, level 2 this, and this. So what, as a small municipality, you really need to focus on that. So you're being proactive instead of reactive to some of the things that are coming up. So usually you would have your governance, your financial, your HR, your level of service or support to your constituents, those type of pieces. And it's in a grid pattern so you can see where you're at and where you need to go.
My thought that you can see on my face was not to criticize anything that you said, but I was reminded of some stories that I've heard where the municipality actually decides that it's in the best interest of our municipality to do something that we can't afford, that the law says we can't do, that there's no public funding for. Sometimes that project will come to the table, and you need to ask staff. Council needs to decide, okay, we want to do this because it's going to save our municipality. And then you go to staff to say, how do you do it? And you come to Peggy and I and say, how do we do this? Because we've been, I've been to the legislature with private members' bills. I would like change the law, get people to buy in, get corporate sponsors. So I agree with you, Lynn, completely, but don't necessarily be constrained by that if you've got an idea that is in the best interest of the municipality, and then your role as head of council or as council is to advocate for the municipality to make it happen.
I was thinking leadership, yes, absolutely.
So, at what point does the councillor obligated to put their personal opinions aside to think about what's best for the municipality as a whole? Are they supposed to be vocal about what their personal opinions are on something? Or are they
That's
supposed
during-
to-
During the debate and before the debate, 100%. The way that our council system, our municipal system is set up in Ontario is that we don't have partisan government. So we don't have the opposition and the majority party. So councillors' personal opinions actually definitely come into their role, and they need to. I think that they have a role to go and talk to their ratepayers and find out sort of what the constituents want to see happen on a large scale, and their personal opinion goes with that, and then it goes, and then they take the advice from staff and whatever package, and they make their decision. So I don't think that in the decision process they ever really put their personal opinion aside, although they might say, I don't want to do this, but my ratepayers want me to, so I'm going to vote against what I would prefer. That happens
Seen
all
that
the time.
happen,
But once the decision is made, then it's a councillor's obligation to support the decision of council. And that'll be in your code of conduct. And that's the tough role of a councillor to say, yep, council, I was in the minority, but council has decided this is where we're going, and so I'm going to do everything I can to make that happen. Okay, so go ahead,
You have
Debbie.
to remember long-term best interest too. You know, the government comes up with this wonderful funding opportunity and we can put up a new recreation center and it's not gonna cost us anything.
Yes,
Take care of it.
But you have to
Until you
consider
have
the
to
life
maintain it.
cycle cost of that.
exactly.
Me
And
too.
we've got some clients that are in really dire straits. There's a municipality, I forget which one it is, but 50 cents of their every
Espanola.
tax dollar
Espanola, I
goes
think
to
it's
pay for the
49,
pool.
49 cents of
49.
every tax dollar, yes, pays the pool.
Because like you said, the government came out, we're going to give you money to build these awesome rec centers, and some of them are fantastic, and they cost an absolute fortune to maintain. And that's something that council didn't consider when they accepted the money. Sometimes the best interest of the municipality is probably to say, we don't want your money, thanks. That's not the right. That's not the right thing.
That's a tough one
Oh,
for
boy,
council,
is it
though, when
ever.
you have the opportunity of putting in a new
Is it
recreation
ever.
facility in your community.
And that's your legacy, for better or for worse. So staff, tell us what the real best interest of the municipality is.
Our legislative authority first.
Okay.
And then, to me, my always the next thing is financial impact. Either way, when you know your financial impact, then you can decide to fight for or against spending, depending on your service delivery priorities, satisfaction of ratepayers and the wellness of your community.
Okay. Anything else? Do you want to talk about that?
That's your turn now.
You guys were talking about something that I thought you were going to bring up. I was impressed. And that is your strategic plan or your council term plan. One of the realities of the best interest of your municipality is probably you're going to hear about accountability and transparency. And so predictability and leadership direction. So the reality, if you have a council term plan established at the beginning of your council term, or your strategic plan is a little bit big, but same kind of process, it lets the ratepayers know, in our municipality, this is the direction that we're going. And it helps sort of weed out some of the peripheral issues that come up and divert council. And so the relationship of the issue to your strategic plan or your council term plan is definitely something that I thought you guys were going to talk about in your best interest in the municipality. But by showing that leadership and avoiding conflict, you actually show the ratepayers and people outside of your municipality that you know how to run a municipality. In the days of, and this is from Steve Black, who was the youngest mayor of Timmins, in the days of Google alerts, if every alert about your municipality is conflict between council and staff, conflict between a particular ratepayer and council, then people who are looking to build the next X plant are going to say, well, these guys can't run a municipality, so I'm going somewhere else. So don't forget that leadership, by showing how you make the rules and showing that you're going to consistently apply your rules and showing that you're willing to change your rules when they're not working, is good leadership that factors into the best interest of the municipality. It's a trick question because there is no best interest in the municipality. The point is that when you're considering something, that everything that we've talked about factors into the best interest of the municipality. And it's really good to have all of those criteria laid out in how you want a staff report to look, so that you can look at it and say, boom, 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 I've got all these things. It is or it is not in the best interest of our municipality. That way council understands what they're going to get from staff. Staff understands what council wants and they can give it to them, and it makes the team work better. And so one of the best interests of the municipality, in my experience, is a smooth working team.
And I have to absolutely agree that the best municipalities where the team, the staff and council work together, and there's not a lot of animosity and there's not a lot of negative media and negative press, those communities are succeeding, and they may be only baby steps incrementally, but they're certainly not dealing with the crisis that are I have 5 communities right now that I'm dealing with where staff and council are in crisis, and there are significant amounts of crisis to the point where one municipality may have no employees within the next couple of weeks. Like, these are serious things that are happening in the sector, and a lot of it's because and I say that when I do working with council, the buck starts and stops with council. Council's the one who sets the direction. The staff are the ones who drive the car. Whatever directions council wants staff to go in, that's the way they're moving. But when you don't give them the direction, and that's the leadership piece, right? Council has to be the leader of the whole arena, and then staff do what they need to do to get the job done for council. And when you can make each other look good, it's such a better sector to work in than dealing with all this crisis stuff. So,
Very simple thing to live by, and Mayor Watson and I have done this for years. The happy wife, happy life thing. Happy clerk.
Thought you were going to say happy clerk.
No. And it's our job.
It
I mean,
is,
as long as
absolutely.
The community is moving forward, the council is not necessarily getting what they want, but are satisfied with where the community is going, as long as staff can make that happen within budget, within the law, within compliance, all that sort of stuff. Your community is going to move forward.
Yeah, starts with the right
Simple.
mindset at
Keep
the
it simple.
council table. Yep.
I want to pick up on some observations of what you just said, Lynn, because I want to make sure everybody appreciates it. You and Mayor Watson have been together for how long?
22 years.
22 years? I was going to say since before I remember, because that's when I started. Because that's when I started. But you called him Mayor Watson. And one of the things that Peggy said is you have to get along. The respect that you show by calling him Mayor Watson, you're demonstrating the respect for the chair. I know that you do like Lynn, but if you didn't, if the fact is you've got to deal with that chair, and if you can let the personalities sort of dissipate and you're working for the organization, that makes your life so much easier. And so that goes to Peggy's point about the team working together. The reality is we spend a lot of time together, and we become friends or enemies because of that. But if we can remember that our job is to serve the chair, because the person might change. I'm sure it's not going to in your case for a long, long time. But it's that chair, it's that
Dylan's ready to
role,
retire.
that's your role to support. And I really appreciated the way that you presented that, because it demonstrates that that works, obviously. Okay.
Then what's-
Something else that works is everybody that runs for council for a reason.
Yeah.
They want to do either something for their community, or they're mad about something, or whatever. I mean, no one runs for those type of positions just for fun. I mean, that sounds better, not for the money. What's very important, when we do this every year, is we sit down and we have a round table with council. We get our councilors to throw their ideas on the table of why they got elected and what they'd like to see for the community. So on a 4-year term, we've already had this. I've got 2 new councilors on mine and 2 other senior councilors. Everybody throws their ideas on the table, and then we work for the next 4 years to see how we can pull those things together as a council for the benefit of our community. And that way, everybody's kind of on the same page. Now, we don't always have to agree, and we certainly don't agree on a number of things and how we get to where we are. But if everyone has an idea, and everybody sitting around the table has an idea of why that other person is sitting around the table, I think it's so much easier when you actually sit down and make these hard decisions, because everybody else knows where everybody else is coming from. And I think we've done that now for a long time, and it works well, I think, because we all kind of know then when an issue does hit the table, who's, the idea is, and how can we make this work, and whatever.
And everybody has a voice.
And everyone has a voice.
And that's leadership.
And that's an informal strategic plan right there.
So we've taken that and been recommending that council set up a council term plan, where you actually do that right at the very beginning of the term. And you set, and you would know better than I, 3, 4, 5 things that you as this council promise the municipality, we're going to achieve these 3 or 4 or 5 things. I'm suggesting it's not 20.
Oh, no.
Because what that's
You'll
going
never
to
get it done.
demonstrate is
It
that
doesn't
you
work.
can't achieve what you say you're going to achieve.
Yeah.
So you're much better off to say, we're going to do these 3 or 4 things or 5 things and make sure it happens, because that's then how you measure your success as a council. It's really helpful for the municipality, because they can say, okay, this council is going to achieve these 3 or 4 things. And so when you get some of the peripheral issues, you can look at that in a staff report and say, this doesn't fit with your council term plan. And so council might be then saying to that group of ratepayers, fantastic idea. We'd like you to bring that forward after the next election, because what we're going to achieve are these 3 or 4 things. And then council works as a team, because they know, and they bought in and they designed this plan. And so we're moving in this direction. And it would take a substantial shift to then move council in a different direction, which is your ability. You might say, oh, number 3, we don't want to do that anymore. But so we're going to replace it with something else. It's really good leadership for head of council to do that with council, for council to do that with staff, for the municipal organization to do that with the whole municipality. And that could become part of your accountability and transparency.
You think?
After lunch.
You think?
Okay, so lunch is happening now. We'd like to keep working through lunch if you're okay
We
with
had
that.
planned it to be a working lunch, because, then that way it keeps the time frame. And the other thing we wanted to gauge before we break for lunch is everyone okay staying till 1:30? We scheduled it till 1, but because we were a little bit late getting started today to be able to get through all of the material, if everyone's okay.
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 Good.
All right, so but those of you who are online, we're going to take a break and grab lunch and then come back to the tables.
We did, we talked about that, right, Mary? When we put that at the beginning. Yes, 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 yes. And I have our representative was gonna give it up. And I felt that I had the time and the inclination to engage everyone. And I am a people person. I like to hear people's thoughts and stuff. And I believe that we are, well, we're kind of unique because we started out and we were Spanish. We were with Spanish. And in '85, we did a split in front of the OMB. And I think it was a benefit to both parties. I think Spanish is a beautiful town. I belong to horticulture here. I have friends here. And we're kind of unique in the way we're laid out. And like we're never, I'm sure, in my lifetime, probably forever, I don't know, have sidewalks and stuff like that. And that was some of the reasons that we wanted to split. And we're 3 little villages, and we each got our little things. And I really, really want the community together as one. We had big plans at one time to put a new municipal office at Wabush Lake, which the property was part of a subdivision. That was, instead of monies, they gave us this property. And a few years ago, we put it in surplus and we sold it because they ended up improving the municipal office itself in Algoma Mills. So going forward, I think we can work together and we can share services with Spanish, with Blind River, because we're so small and we have so little staff too. It's important for us to share and to come together at these kind of meetings and stuff to share our ideas and, and be educated. I believe we can always use education staff and definitely council. And I would just like to say thank you for offering this training. And I personally really, really appreciate it, and I'm sure everybody in the room does too. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Green Township North Shore counselor was an employee for 26 years. Part of that was quick, so I guess I couldn't walk away.
Mayor Green?
Not yet. This time I do.
I'm pretty sure Brenda taught me how to do my very first OMB appeal. I'm pretty sure you did. You had the binder all tabbed and organized perfectly for me to go in and present the appeal, and of course we were successful. So, your fault. Who are you?
Oh, Mary, you do that. Clerk Treasurer, Township of North Shore.
Wondering which way you're going. Are you going across the roads or are you just going wherever? Okay.
Is it my go?
Yes.
I'm Deborah Jacques, council, Spanish, first term. It's actually been a lot of fun, a lot of learning, something I never ever thought I would do, ever. But I'm glad I made that choice.
And you have an all-female council, right?
We do.
That's cool.
It is cool.
And no conflict.
Actually, it's great.
Maybe we should amend the act.
Did we predict that it would be conflict because
They
it was
did.
all female?
Actually, it was a cat fight. You're gonna have a cat. And we haven't had one
You
issue.
probably get a whole lot more done.
Go ahead.
I'm Karen Bob Pickards. I'm the deputy mayor, second term deputy mayor in Spanish. Other than where I grew up, this is my next home. I was a military wife and lived all over Canada. And when my youngest child left, I decided to give back to the community that welcomed us, and here I am. And I love it.
Good.
I'm Jocelyn Bishop, the mayor. I was council for 12 years before this. I enjoy my role. And I'm glad we have an all-female council, which we made history because we are all elected. So we had a lot of publicity. And I think it's good to show that the
female control, like it could, not to govern the town as well. That's something I think, just, likes to see a lot of the female in politics. I didn't live here all my life though, but I'm from Quebec. Originally, I'm French Canadian, but I moved here when I was 6 years old. So I always wanted to do a lot for my community, and I always did because my husband was really involved in politics. So I decided to step up.
Thank you. I'm glad you did. Linz.
I'm one of those outcast males. I've been elected a little while. I'm the mayor of McDonald, Meredith, and Aberdeen Additional, which is Echo Bay. I've enjoyed it. I've seen numerous changes within our municipal structures from the time I first got elected to now. It's just amazing. It doesn't seem to be in the same game anymore. But I'm really enjoying it, and I'm still enjoying it. And these sessions are very educational for all of us. Just us all getting together and having some conversation together is also very educational for all of us. And I think these are good ways of doing that. Whether you're a seasoned male or a
Seasoned
bear.
Len, I think you raised a really good point, and I hope everybody already knows this, but certainly looking around the room and sharing some contact information, and don't be afraid to call your friend counselors in other municipalities, because that's actually one of the things I love about working in the North is the collegiality of municipalities and also the similar issues that we find. And so the chances are really good if you have an issue that you're struggling with, that your neighbors either are facing it or have faced it, and taking advantage of the intelligence in this room is a fantastic tool. And I think that's really a wise observation.
And Duque, administrator of the Township of McDonald, Meredith, and additional 22 years, and I'm still doing okay.
I would say you sure are. I would say you sure are. Okay, Melody.
Melody Rose, counselor for Township of North Shore, first term. Also, my kids have left and I have more time to do this, not a lot more, but I always like learning new things, and this is a big learning curve. So my turn to give back to the community as well, and I want to thank Spanish for hosting this, and Tammy for the wonderful food, because it's not just food, she put her stuff in there. That was good. Thank you, Tammy. There we are. She's back up and gone.
I don't see her. We'll get her in.
She's out getting fresh air, and I know her well enough to.
Pam Walsh, Deputy Clerk, Carolina.
Why?
It's Debbie's fault. Sorry.
This
So I
was a
started in Iron Bridge, and then nothing like it.
good. Your turn.
Thank you. George Bilodeau. I've been involved in politics and organization since I was out of diapers. From the time from Cobalt to Notre Dame in Quebec to Elliott Lake to Blind River and now Township of North Shore.
You're in.
You're on shores.
See, you get advice from staff.
I'm a high school teacher from career. I did some teaching for 10 years in Quebec in the high school system there, and 33 years in Ontario, so 43 years in classroom. I enjoyed every minute of it. I enjoy every minute being on council. This is my technically the second term on council. First term as counselor. So I started second term on council, but I had to resign for health reasons and other issues. Now I'm back as mayor, and I enjoy the challenge. In my life, I was involved with forming and setting up or creating Collège Boreal. I was appointed by the province as a governor to start it up and to find out what we wanted to do at one point. And another point when I was in Elliott Lake, as a teacher, I was a volunteer with economic development when the layoffs came about. So I was involved in a lot of the economic development issues. The park, the Deer Trail Park at the corner of 108, that's my baby. Helped put that together, got a committee together, got it up and going. Spent about $1.5 million on that part. And then my experience in Elliott Lake, I ended up on LNOS, and I was chair, CEO of LNOS for a little over 4 years. I had to resign when I moved to Dean Lake because I was outside of the territory for LNOS. And now with Huron Shores, well, I'm still having fun.
Good. That's really important. Actually, I think that's one of the most important things is that if we can remember to have fun, as much as the world is sometimes falling down around our ears, if we can look for that fun, I think that's really, again, good leadership because it keeps people motivated.
There's a silver lining behind every cloud.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of looking for it and finding it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm Debbie Tonelli, been with municipal government as assistant clerk treasurer, now clerk administrator for the municipality of Huron Shores for 31 years. We amalgamated in 1999. 4 municipalities became one. It's a challenge, still is. But we keep plugging through day at a time. One of the things that I think is really important, and it's great that we have both council and staff here today, is teamwork. Doesn't mean that we always have to get along, but at the end of the day, once a decision is made and we can move forward with it cohesively, that's so important. So it's something that I really like to stress is our teamwork fellowship.
And I have to thank you for me being here too, because you've been a fantastic leader and resource for me for a long time. and it's so much fun to have the people that have had such an impact on me here. I really appreciate that you're here. Thank you. And Pam, you too.
I'm Pam. So Pam Lordy, CEO for Treasurer for the Town of Spanish. Started off as the front counter, so I worked my way up. In my 30th year now. So it's like 13 when I started.
I was going to say 12.
One thing I can honestly say is I even though I might not seem it some days, I really do enjoy my job. Very seldom does a day go past and I'm not humming going up the sidewalk on the way into work. It might not be the same when I'm going out of work. I definitely have a little off in my step on the way in, and I do enjoy something new every day. I appreciate our council, and I just building on what you said, Debbie. I remember Paul asking the question in a room full of councillors and clerks and asking a councillor, why did you run for council? And then turning around and asking a staff member the same and getting the same answer. So even though we might not always see the same how to get to where we're going, the ultimate goal is our communities.
Who are you?
So I'm Peggy Young Lovelace, and I was doing the math in my head, and I now have over 30 years experience in community, economic, and governance development. I spent 6 years as a CAO clerk treasurer, and that was the impetus for creating EFRM. I decided to semi-retire, and don't laugh. Because I saw that there's a need in the sector, and you know, you ladies have been here a long time. And someone's going to have to come in and replace you at some point in time because you're not going to do it forever. I know that. But there's But the unfortunate part with the sector is that there's a lot of people in this position, and we're finding that the communities don't have the financial wherewithal to pay $130,000 or $140,000 to get somebody who is qualified from Southern Ontario as a deputy to come up and work in this area. And so I see a real role for E4M as we grow to do a lot more mentoring. And that's why, you know, this is the recruitment sign. So when you guys do decide to retire, all of you, this is something that we look at doing. And I really try to match the right person for the right situation. Because we definitely have some situations. And the whole idea of E4M for me was to be able to give back to the sector. I really believe that this level of government is the most effective level of government there is. And I remember a story, and I can't remember what development conference I was at. They were talking about the city of Calgary before it became a formal city, and it was just really a group of ratepayers. And they wanted a hospital, and the government said, no, we're not giving any money for the hospital. And they said, okay, screw you, we're going to do it ourselves. And they did. And they raised the money, and they got the builders, and they got people to do this. And I really believe that people do drive a community. And this is that level of government that has the ability to do that. So if you've got good leadership, you can go anywhere. And that's one of the things I really like about Peter Kenyon is he's just got that knack of working with communities and getting people inspired to do things. And so I'll get off my soap. Oh, Tammy needs to come in.
Thank you.
Bye. You need to introduce yourself.
Oh, yeah. Who are you and why are you here?
My name is Tammy Alberts and I'm a director with E4M and I cook. I also help people who need to call with crisis or to holler, vent or cry or help them kind of put life back in perspective because I know your work is very stressful and kind of the behind the scenes chick. Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Goodbye.
Okay, so we have a lot to cover in a very little time. And so I'm going to go through this as quickly as I can. We talked already a lot about engagement. And one of the things that we're seeing, sometimes the people that are most engaged, and I suppose that's in air quotes, are adversarial, negative, or have a specific agenda. We're seeing that more and more frequently. And what I am trying to suggest to council is that we're trying to recruit or attract or facilitate engagement by the rest of the community. And we have to be careful that those who are the most engaged, particularly if it's in a negative matter, aren't able to derail the municipality and prevent engagement by others. And so I'm not going to tell you too much more about that other than to be aware of it. Citizen engagement costs the municipality. It's critically necessary. It needs to be facilitated. But when you're doing citizen engagement activities, remember that costs both financially and staff and council time. And so it's important to balance the value of the feedback with the cost. And I suppose the story that I have in that situation is one of my municipal clients has a fellow who is a publisher of an online blog, and he has taken on the municipality and decided that his job is to be a watchdog, and he sends hundreds of emails to municipal staff. So he's very engaged for sure. Got to the point where council has now decided, because staff has been unable to do their job, that they're going to put a protocol in place for how to deal with this fellow. And so all of his communication actually now has to go to council, for council to decide what and how it will be responded to, because he was just dominating staff. Hopefully that's not happening in all municipalities, but we're seeing it more and more often. I just want you to be alert to that and remember that it's council's role to decide how municipal resources are spent. And so if you're facing that, don't hesitate to ensure that there's a protocol in place to deal with that person, not to say shut them out, but to deal with and restrict their ability to control municipal resources so that you can focus on the other X hundred or thousand of ratepayers that you have. One of the things that we're seeing in addition to this is that where people don't like the decision that's being made by council, they attack the process. So that often means criticism of staff, criticism of policies, trying to come to council and delegations and things, all appropriate in the right circumstances, but be aware that where people are really challenging your process, they might be just upset with the decision. And the reality is we're not going to please everybody, and that's okay. That's part of our job. Our job is to look after the whole municipality. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and the experience that we've had most often with this whole attacking of the process is it's typically the person who is either the CAO or the clerk. They're the ones who get the biggest brunt of this, because then there's this rumor going out around the municipality about how the clerk or the CAO runs the show. And in fact, I love the story Paul tells about a municipality where the CAO was the media and everybody, the social media, everything was talking about the CAO and how it was she was so terrible because she passed or she did something about the garbage bylaw.
Yeah.
And as you know, CAOs don't pass bylaws. Council passes bylaws. But who they attack is they attack the person who made the recommendation to council, who brought the report to council, rather than attack council and the council's decision. It's usually the staff. So when you start to see some of this kind of stuff happening in your community, I hope it becomes a red flag. It may, sometimes it is true. We've had situations where the staff aren't as good as the people that are in this room. And they have been problematic in that role. Most of the time, though, the staff are there trying to do the very best job they can with the tools that they're given to do the job. And they don't deserve to be attacked like this. And we've seen it in a number of circumstances where it's right in council meetings.
And so here's a tool to deal with that. The accountability and transparency bylaw is the tool that we're here to talk about today. So municipality, keep in mind, we're a level of government. We're not a business. The customer's not always right with us. We are defined by geography. We're created by statute. All of our power comes from the statute. We're actually the only level of government that is required to operate transparently. So we don't, like the provincial and federal government, have the ability to have a caucus session just because we want to. We do have section 239 where we can go into closed session, but we don't have that. We're held to a higher standard than the other levels of government. We're regulated by the Act, the Municipal Act, and a whole bunch of other pieces of legislation. We're able to pass bylaws, and this is why I say you have to remember that we're a level of government, because we pass, when we make a decision at council, that's the law. We set a law that says you have to pay your taxes. We set a law that says you're only allowed to put so many bags of garbage out. That's the law. People don't have to all be happy about it, but we're doing it with the idea that it's the best for our municipality. We're subject to the highest level of scrutiny.
Aren't we just?
We are. From the province, from the stakeholders being the residents, taxpayers, interest groups, and so on.
Did you say stakeholders or stakeholders?
Sometimes. So we elect a council, and then that's the ratepayers' say. That's where we're most accountable, is at the ballot box. We make decisions within our authority, and we're required to enact a bunch of policies, including this accountability and transparency policy. Section 270 is a section that you should be familiar with. It says what we have to have policies about. These are the mandatory policies for a municipality: sale of land, hiring employees, procurement of goods and services, and then this is interesting language because they don't say you have to have an accountability and transparency policy. They say the manner in which the municipality will try to ensure that it is accountable to the public for its actions, and the manner in which the municipality will try to ensure that its actions are transparent to the public. It suggests that not all decisions are going to be transparent, and not all decisions are necessarily to be accountable. It's not a mandatory section with it, which I see as interesting language. So here's why I think that it's such a useful tool for us. And that is that we believe that the audience for this bylaw is actually the public. This bylaw is the tool to deal with public that don't understand. This is the answer to Lynn's question about, well, how do you educate the public? And the way that we've drafted this draft bylaw is to essentially say, here's how the municipality works. Here's what the rules are. Here's how we're going to make decisions. And so it's a tool for staff when they have questions to give members of the public to say, here's the rules of our game. This is how our government operates, and so that people can understand the operation of their government. Because of that, we've tried to write the bylaw in easily readable English so that the ratepayers can understand it. One of the things that I would ask you, I was supposed to ask at the beginning of the presentation, what we should call this thing. Because like I said, in 22 years, I've never heard anybody say, oh, it's in our accountability and transparency bylaw. And to be honest, of all the municipal websites that I've gone on, I almost never, except when I'm trying to draft one, look at their accountability and transparency bylaw. So I think there's a better name for it so that people can understand this is the rules of the game. And I'd love to hear what that is from you, because I haven't figured it out yet. Challenge number 3, we're super running out of time for. Is that the telephone?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, so the challenge I wanted to do this time was to break into 2 groups. And group 1 would leave this room and group 2 would stay here. And both groups would hear the same story, but how you hear it would be different. So I'm sure some of you heard about the telephone game and how it works. Well, the idea was that this is a big, long story, and Tammy would start and tell one person, that person would have to tell the next, and the next, and the next, and next, and then the last person has to come back and tell what they heard. And the group that was here got to hear it firsthand, and part of the group I would let take notes, the other part I wouldn't, and then that way you could see how a complaint process should work and why it falls down when members of council or somebody else gets involved in this whole situation. And so I really had wanted to read you the story about Amy, who had an issue with her garbage. And but if we have time at the end, I will. I'd rather go through the bylaw. So
the point of the exercise was to demonstrate how messages change as they filter through people and help you understand, and I know everybody in this room already does, but help explain then to your ratepayers when you're educating them to look at the procedure bylaw and why it's important, the accountability and transparency bylaw, and why it's important to have these rules and follow the rules so that the message properly gets from the customer to the person that can pick up the garbage. And so in fact, when we were doing council orientation training, we often would tell staff and council in the room that a really good idea would be to have that complaints form with every member of council. And if the person doesn't want to put their name on it, then your responsibility as council is to write on it what your complaint was, the date and the time, and then log that with the clerk. Because the clerk is the keeper of all of the records of the municipality. And if that is a municipal record, it helps you track. And it was one of the ways to also deal with that member of council who says, well, I had 15 ratepayers complaining about X, when really the only person complaining about X was that member of council. And so it's really important that you have a system and a process in place, because
the minute that you have a council member doing what Councillor Adams did is it defeats the purpose of the accountability and transparency bylaw.
So we have some overarching terms, and this is our definition. It's not necessarily a correct definition, but we see accountability meaning that council and its committees and local boards, because it applies to all those, and municipal employees are responsible to the public for their actions or decisions. So you're accountable, you're responsible for your decisions and actions to the public. Transparency, and you're going to see this definition in the draft bylaw. So first we said transparency means that the municipality actively encourages and fosters stakeholder participation and openness in its decision-making process. It means that the municipality's decision-making process is open and clear to the public. But I really liked the amendments to the Occupational Health and Safety Act that had a negative definition, and I thought it's a good opportunity here. Transparency is not the automatic and unrestricted disclosure of information that the municipality is required or permitted to keep confidential pursuant to Section 239 of the Municipal Act and MFIPA. Because I have had some councillors say to me, well, my obligation is to be transparent, and so I have to tell people about what happened in closed session. I've had situations where we're in closed session, I'm giving them legal advice, I'm getting a budget to negotiate, and then an individual councillor goes to the party I'm negotiating with and says, well, council decided you can have $100,000. Well, that's not transparency. That's actually acting outside of the councillor's role. Okay, so here's our draft bylaw, and Peggy's going to share it.
Yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to go through the overview, and
I'll do the overview while you share.
I need to put this online first.
Okay.
Which means I have to. I can't. I have to wait until you're done going through this because the people on electronically.
Okay, so the overview, the way that we've structured it, we see this as kind of the ultimate brochure or flyer or book that the municipality can give to the ratepayers about the rules of the game. And so we start with the preamble, the whereas clauses about why we have this, the fact that that we're required to have it, but that it lays out the rules. Thank you.
You want?
I do.
I don't want you to read through it yet. I want you to do the high-level overview. Then we're going to put the draft up.
Okay. So it starts with the whereas clauses, where this policy comes from. Then there's the policy about accountability and transparency and an explanation of why the bylaw is in place and how it works. And then the bulk of the policy, the bylaw, is actually the schedules. And so the schedules are going to be a lot of the policies that your municipality has. And so it's important for both staff and council to remember that when you're changing policies that are accountability type policies, that those schedules in your accountability and transparency bylaw get updated as well. And so it's going to be, I think it's going to be an important document for staff to be conversant with for the purposes of staff reports. And so that when there is a policy change, it gets reflected in the accountability and transparency bylaw, because my experience has been that a lot of municipalities have an accountability and transparency bylaw, and it's in the filing cabinet over there, but people don't often go to it. And I think this is the tool to deal with education. This is the tool to deal with conflict by saying, here's all rules of the game. So we'll talk about the purpose of the policy being to communicate with the public the ways in which the municipality will strive to ensure that its actions are transparent. Definitions in the policy about things like what is accountability, what is transparency. Our policy statement saying we're going to be an accountable and transparent government. how the policy applies, essentially that applies to all actions of council and staff, a policy review process, which is quite important in this case because this is a bylaw that actually touches many of your other policies. So reviewing it on an annual basis to ensure that you've got them all up to date is important. Amendments to the bylaw and how those are done, we set it up so that it's easy to amend a schedule, basically to change your code of conduct, and then that schedule gets slotted in. I don't know what validity means. What are you talking about?
That's if there's any part of it that's not legal or enforceable.
Severability. So yeah, okay. So that's just legal stuff that says if there's something that's not upheld by the government, that the whole bylaw doesn't fall. Title.
No one understands severability or whatever.
Previous bylaws and the effective date. So that's how it's structured. So then the schedules talk about the legislative authority. So what legislation we're governed by, and there's actually several pages of it. You can consider it, add to it, take away from it. The point being that there is a lot of law that impacts municipalities, and we've tried to highlight the ones that are most often used. Public participation information sharing is the next section of schedules that deals with how the public participates in local government. So your procedural bylaw be here about how they get a delegation in front of council, or if they can't get a delegation in front of council, that they go and talk to a councillor. Internal government governance are the sections dealing with your code of conduct and staff council relations policy, how we're going to operate as a internal municipal government, and then financial matters dealing with FIR and your budget process and so on. Okay, so now you're going to share the. So as Peggy gets ready to share the actual draft bylaw, what we see this as being, or how we see this as being useful is as among other things, a leadership tool. So council can use this to talk about how they're going to be accountable and transparent and live by those rules. So say, here's what the rules are, and ensure that their council's aware of them and that they follow them. So they're a leadership tool by being used. Council's leading by example and saying, oh, these are the rules of the game. This is how we are going to make decisions. And by referring to this and having this on the council table and on the municipal website, it promotes consistent decision making. So it'll have processes in there about your complaint process is going to be there. So you're not going to have Councillor Adams going to the truck driver. You're going to have them saying, wait, I know in the accountability and transparency policy, we've got a process that deals with this, flip to the complaint process or the feedback process. And that's available for everybody.
You need to put it on there now?
Let's share it around first. It's on here?
Yeah.
Is it the only thing that's on here?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have a computer that you want to put the bylaw on?
I'm not sure how to do that. Not save or anything.
You know how to do it.
You want them in there?
Well, I want you to be able to review it.
Yeah, the idea was that you could actually update your own bylaw as we go through it. So I'd asked everyone to bring a laptop if they had one. But I will update it, and I will, as we go, there will be parts of it that you will have to do yourself, because this one is such a, there's so many different changes. It was easier for you to do those yourself. So I'm sorry I'm giving you, pardon? Oh, yeah. I'll make sure everyone gets a copy of it.
So this one won't be copyrighted then?
Well, what I've got for you, it is still copyrighted, but you can change it. If you change it and we don't review it, then I can't say that the changes are consistent with the legislation, but I'm happy to review it, but we're going to give it to you in Word so that you can make it yours. Okay, so it's a tool as well for the officers and employees at the municipality because it shows how.
Once you load it, can you pass the stick too?
Okay. I like interrupting.
And it's an education tool for new counselors and interested ratepayers so that when somebody comes and says, how does something work? This is kind of, Peggy calls it the municipal Bible about the rules of the game. It's also helpful for council candidates. The last election, we did some candidate training. And it would have been helpful to have this sort of schedule of rules, if you will.
I'm sorry, do you mind if I interrupt?
For all of council. What's challenge 4? Or we just go to the bylaw?
The challenges were to talk about how they might make that work. How they might use it as a leadership tool, how they might use it as
Okay, we'll go back to that.
I think we should go back at the end. I think you need to put it on when the stick comes around and.
So the first section was about how it's used as a leadership tool. We also see it as a public engagement tool because it builds trust and emphasizes that this is a level of government and how the government system is going to work. We hope that it fosters understanding so that if you give this to ratepayers, they'll understand how their municipal government is supposed to work. And this is, the reinforced authority is something that I think sometimes we forget as a municipality. We are a level of government, so we set law, and the law that we set has to be complied with. So it matters not that people don't like our property standards bylaw. They still have to comply with it. So that's why I said I agree with you about 80% that the customer's always right. Because the customers who have a dangerous or dirty yard aren't going to like your procedural standards bylaw, and it's not council's obligation to make them happy. But this reinforces the authority to say, these are the tools that we're going to use, and it changes, hopefully, the relationship so that ratepayers realize they're dealing more with a level of government, just like the province or the feds, and they can make requests for us to change the law, but they can't, well, they can demand whatever they want. They can't, by their demands, cause us to necessarily change the law. So in some cases, the customer's wrong because they should have cleaned up their yard, or they shouldn't have a CCAN on the property or something like that.
The basis of the customer relationship type training is to be able to diffuse the situation.
Yeah.
And okay, yes, maybe the customer is wrong at this instance.
Yeah.
But you can't give him the perception that he's totally wrong. But I would somehow, we'll see how we can solve this. And if the staff and workers and laborers all have that capability or training, they can just diffuse the situations.
And so we hope that this can be sort of the tool to say, okay, here's the procedure, here's the accountability and transparency bylaw that lays out all of the rules that we've all agreed to be bound by. And hopefully promote public engagement by indicating that we want public engagement and how public engagement is facilitated and how the public gets issues in front of council.
Where's the stick now? Has it moved around yet? Oh. Just noticed Debbie getting hers because you're getting close to the.
We also see it as a conflict resolution tool so that when, and I think you and I are agreeing on this, when somebody's upset about the way that government is working, when somebody's upset about a decision, when somebody's upset that they're not allowed to have a CCAN on their property, you can use this to say, well, here's the law. And so I am optimistic that this actually gets put on your website, that we figure out a name for it so that people understand this is really the rule book. And therefore reduce conflict because people understand in advance of the conflict how this is going to operate.
Okay, that's last.
Okay, so now we're going to the bylaw.
Yes. So you need the stick now.
I think I have it.
Do you have it?
I think I've got the bylaw, right? I should have it right here. Oh dear. Close that. Sorry, guys. Where's the last one? This one? Yeah, no.
It's been,
I've got one with everything accepted though.
because we made changes even after that.
Well, we couldn't get them.
Via your email. Because you emailed it to us. That's how I printed it.
Oh, I see, okay. we didn't-
Oh, good. That's not really what I want up there. Where's that? Why is that hard?
So, yes. So when anybody
Accountability and transparency.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Duplicate. Duplicate. There we go. Okay, so can everybody see a computer? If you don't mind, I'm going to sit while I go through this. So the bylaw itself is not super long. And we'll give it to you all in Word so that you can input your own bylaw number, your municipal name. So we start off with the whereas your municipality is a statutory level of government created by the province of Ontario. I find that that's really important to emphasize because people do approach us as if we're not a statutory level of government. I don't know what they think we are, but a business or a club or something a lot less formal than we are. And I really appreciate Clerk Duguay's addressing Mayor Watson as Mayor Watson. It provides that level of formality that is really kind of necessary and difficult in small municipalities, because if we all grew up with each other, we know that it's Lynn, but right now, today, he's Mayor Watson. And it's important to address people in that formal manner to, I think, foster the respect that a level of government needs. So we put that in there. Basically, the next part says that we're responsible for providing good government. Next part, that we have to have an accountability and transparency policy, that we think it's important to be accountable and transparent. And then that we recognize the importance of facilitating public engagement, which really is the reason why we're here.
So before you go on, Paul, one of the things that we noticed in a lot of these bylaws, it was just some whereas clauses, and then the policy was a schedule. And I really wanted the policy to be kind of cemented in the law part, and then the schedules to be the other pieces. So that's why we've worked with the whereas clauses, because we looked at this as being your explanation to your ratepayers or to the public in general, that your level of government, here's how you want to work, here's all the rules of the game. So if you look at it from that perspective, it does look quite different than what you're used to seeing.
So the purpose of the policy is similar to the Section 270 mandate for us. Then we have a bunch of definitions. So accountability is what we had suggested on the slide earlier. As we're going through this, if any of you have a better idea or an idea that you want to discuss, please tell us, because one of the ways this is successful is when everybody around the table gets to help us with their experience. So we said that accountability is that council, its committees, and local boards and municipal employees are responsible to the public for their actions and decisions. Committee, this is where you're going to need to put your committee definition from your procedural bylaw, because you may not have committees. You may have a bunch of committees. So this is going to relate to your procedural bylaw. Definition of council actually is interesting because there isn't really a definition in the legislation. So we've made this up saying it's a body of all persons elected, acclaimed, and or appointed to exercise the powers of the municipality. Reason we put the qualifiers in there is that we have had people challenge councillors who are acclaimed to say, well, you're not really elected. Well, whatever. You're a councillor and they have the same role and responsibility. So we wanted to just hit that head on. Local board, again, will refer to your procedural bylaw. Municipality means a geographic area whose inhabitants are incorporated. Municipal employees are both the employees and the statutory officers. Public, we said, was residents and businesses operating in the municipality, regardless of whether or not they can vote, because corporations can't vote, but we're certainly interested in what they've got to say as a business.
And the other part is you often have ratepayers who live outside of the country, and even though they don't have an opportunity to vote, they still pay taxes within the municipality. So
statutory officers, we've listed the most common, but if you have others, then that can be added in here. Then we had the transparency definitions, and I've included the negative definition here so that when a councillor tells a ratepayer that they're not permitted to disclose what was done in an in-camera meeting, they could point to this to say, I know you're saying we're not being transparent. And when we said that people are attacking the process, we're finding people using the language of accountability and transparency and saying, well, you're not being transparent. Well, that's why we thought it was important to put this in to say, well, this is what transparent means. And it doesn't mean that we're going to tell you everything, because that's actually a breach of legislation in certain circumstances. So then we have our policy statement that our council acknowledges the municipality is a statutory level of government responsible to function in a way that's accountable and transparent. And then acknowledge that in the purpose, occasionally accountability will require accountability. So we're responsible for our decision, will require that open communication will be curtailed, such as we're dealing with legal advice and proceedings. So we're again saying, we're being accountable to you by not disclosing the solicitor-client privilege information so that we don't end up paying more than we have to in a settlement and raising your taxes. And that's how we're being accountable to you. Council has the leadership role and is committed to enhance public trust by adopting and following these policies. So you're saying these are the rules. Council desires to explain to the public the ways in which they will be engaged or permitted to participate. In other words, they don't get to just put their hand up and participate in a council meeting. There's a process. We want you to be engaged, but we want you to follow that process. Okay, so then how the policy applies. It acknowledges the statutory role of council. And basically, this is a parroting of Section 224 of the Municipal Act, indicating that the application of this policy applies to everybody. So it applies to the public. because it says how you participate in a council meeting. It applies to council because it's got a procedural bylaw. It applies to committees, local boards, everybody. So this is an overarching policy. And then the further aspects of the policy are found in the schedules, and we've tried to organize the schedules by sort of large areas. Talked about a policy review. And we suggested that the policy be reviewed at the end of each council term, and changes to the bylaw be adopted by council before December 1st of any election year. So rather than do it on an annual basis, and if you wanted to,
Change that date in the election.
Ah.
New council starts November 15th.
good point.
Good call.
So do we want to do it? We should do it before lame duck.
They're
Why
not
don't we
making-
say-
It's not a financial decision that they're making, changing this policy.
No, but I just think it's better if these are the rules of the game.
Okay, so then you want it done before
June
June
1st.
30th.
June
Oh,
30th.
Council participation in the amendments, so.
Yeah.
Probably before the amendments.
So June 30th?
Can't edit. You got that? Oh no.
Yes, I do.
And that this, so we wanted to have it at the end of the council term, because that council is going to be most familiar with all of the policies and changes and things that they have done, rather than the beginning of the next term, where you get new councillors who come on and they don't know what has happened. So the idea was that this is one of the last big policy issues that council deals with. You could do it on an annual basis. You can do it however you want. This was just our thought about where to put it in the cycle.
It doesn't mean that you can't be done more, but it has to be done at least once in the term of council. And I think that's the important part.
And so there's a bit of guidance on how to do the review. And so in addition just to reviewing to make sure you've got all the policies updated, that you actually consider how well it's achieving the objectives. So are ratepayers saying, well, I didn't know what the rules are. I didn't know what the rules are. Or are they saying you didn't follow the procedural bylaw? So you consider the effect of it. How is it working? As well as the technical aspects of it. An amendment process. Remember that this is for the ratepayers. So this is explaining the process. So the amendments can be made by schedules to the bylaw. So you can add any policy that affects the rules of how your council is going to work to the appropriate section of the schedules. And that the clerk can make amendments to minor areas that don't affect the primary objectives, so that you don't have to deal, you know, if we spelled the name of the municipality wrong, the clerk can just amend that. The validity or severability clause just says if any paragraph in this bylaw is held invalid, that the rest of the bylaw stays in force. Short title, I really would like us to change this. Accountability and transparency bylaw doesn't seem to be intuitive. People don't go looking on your website for your accountability and transparency bylaw. So I would love it if somebody would tell us what this should be called. Council according to Hoyle or something like that.
I didn't hear what she said.
Council for Dummies.
I was thinking municipalities, municipal rules for dummies.
You repeal your previous accountability and transparency bylaw and say the date that this comes
Yes.
into effect. So that is the short language of the bylaw itself. And then we get into the schedules. So we have the legislative authority, and this is meant to be a list of the most common pieces of legislation that affect the municipal operation. So for federal, we really came up with the Criminal Code of Canada. We don't really think that there's a lot of federal law that we apply on a day-to-day basis.
I was thinking about railways. railway crossings in municipalities and whether or not that fell under the federal and.
Lotteries provincial. So criminal code touches that. I mean, fiddling with a lottery would be a criminal offense for sure. We could put the Railway Act in, but we do deal with them.
So, there's a lot of municipalities that have rail lines that go through their municipality.
So we can put the Railway Act in, and we'll get the correct title of it. So then we've broken down the provincial legislation into large sections. So the general government sort of sets up how our government exists. So we've got the Municipal Act, the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act, Municipal Elections Act, MFIPA, and the Ombudsman Act. So those create our municipal structure. And then we're subject to other governing legislation, the Human Rights Code, that's the provincial Human Rights Code that we're subject to, not the federal one. The Employment Standards Act, Occupational Health and Safety Act, and Public Sector Salary Disclosure Act. Then we got to taxation and financial management. So we've got the Municipal Property Assessment Act, the Assessment Act itself, the Assessment Review Board Act, dealing with municipal taxation, and then the FIR return for Ontario, the Asset Management Reg, and the Public Sector Accounting Board Standards of Practice. Anything else for taxation and finance that we've missed? You did a good job, Peggy. Then we get Public Health and Safety. So Community Safety and Policing Act, DSAB, Emergency Management, FPPA, Liquor License, and the Police Services Act are the ones that we think are referred to the most. Bylaw enforcement, we just put the Provincial Offences Act there. FPPA could have gone there again, but we didn't want to duplicate. Then with respect to our highway jurisdiction, and you can see that we've organized this basically by the spheres of jurisdiction. Bridges Act, Highway Traffic Act, Road Access Act, and Weed Control Act. Transportation systems other than highways, we didn't have any specific legislation. Some municipalities, like there's an OC Transpo Act. Navigable waters. Yeah, that should go in. Is that federal? That's federal.
That's federal. I'm thinking drainage.
Well, Drainage Act, we did put in under the drainage section, but navigable waters is federal. And so we should put that up in the federal legislation. Anything else for transportation systems? I don't think there's a lot for our municipalities, but if you happen to have a LRT system in your municipality, you may want to put the specific legislation in there. I know that Lynn was thinking of putting one in. Navigable Waters Act.
Okay.
Waste management, we've got the Environmental Assessment Act, the EPA, Nutrient Management, Resource Recovery and Circular Economy Act, Waste Diversion, and Food and Organic Waste Policy Statement. Public utilities, we've got all of these that we're really familiar with, the Clean Drinking Water Act, Drinking Water Protection, Water Resources, and Public Utilities Acts. Culture, Parks, Rec, and Heritage, Public Libraries, Cemeteries, and Ontario Heritage Act. Drainage, we just had the Drainage Act. Structures is big because we've got building code, conservation authorities, farming, food production, forestry, housing development, line fences, ALPAT Act, Places to Grow Act, Planning Act, Shoreline Property Assistance Act. Those need to be italicized. Places to Grow, Shoreline Property Assistance, and PPS. PPS doesn't. And they're working on updating the PPS again to hopefully have more development in Northern Ontario. For animals, we had Dog Owners Liability, Pounds, and Protection of Livestock and Poultry from Dogs Act.
What about the
There may be more.
farmers, when they get their animals killed by a bear or a wolf? Comes under.
Under protection of livestock.
Livestock?
I'll go up in the M&R.
I'm just wondering what act it's under, whether it's under this one or whether it's similar.
I think it's similar.
Make a note for me to look at that for me, please, and
I'm gonna put
I'll
it in here
circulate
with
that.
brackets.
Livestock.
it could be just livestock. I
Dog side.
wonder if it's livestock.
Yeah, there's a separate one than from dogs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Economic Development Services, we didn't have any.
And the reason is, the only one I could think of is actually in the municipal act. And that's where you can have a development corporation.
Yeah.
So I didn't know if there was anything else that would fit under there.
Yeah,
The
the
only-
municipal
you know-
act does.
You know what
apply to
might be
lots
able to
of
go
these.
under there, though, is a BIA. Because there's an act, isn't there, a Business Improvement Association Act?
I could find out.
Business licensing, would you have the lottery in there?
I think that's a good idea.
Lottery tickets or
The-
tickets or-
Yeah,
We'll worry
Ontario.
about it later, the
Yeah.
formatting.
Yeah.
The other thing we didn't, is the community improvement plan stuff. They had a list of business licensing
Lottery licensing. So it's, what the heck is it called?
we'll get the right,
Ontario-
we'll get the proper
yeah.
titles before we send out the final to everybody.
Okay, so next schedule is dealing with public participation. So we say that we're committed to fostering public participation. We're going to do it by including these things. Now, some of your municipalities might not have all of these policies or strategies in place. So you can delete and add as appropriate, but things we've seen are community engagement strategies, your procedural bylaw, which obviously governs how the public are specifically engaged with meetings, feedback or complaint policy. I think it's important to put that in here so that the public understands that that is part of how they communicate with us. And so they shouldn't feel bad about calling. And we want to try to reduce the negative connotation to complaints. Your notice bylaw about when you have meetings or public events. Records retention bylaw, which I think is the next one we're going to
It's gonna be the fall.
work on in the fall. Strategic plan, official plan, zoning bylaw, and your council term plan. So all of that deals with public participation and information sharing. So you may need to customize that for your municipality.
There might be other things that you have, like your social media policy, or a communication strategy, or your emergency services plan, things like that, that might go in some of these places. You might find they go in more than one section. I know I was struggling with that when I was trying to, when Paul and I were working on how to put these in a layout. So the procedure bylaw goes in more than one place. It's kind of a pain to actually have, what I envision here is that this is a Bible. Like, you have a big binder, and in here, each of these sections, that policy's in there. So it sits in your office. If someone comes in, it's one-stop shopping. It's easier online, right? Because you just put the PDFs in the name and the order. But I had it in my mind that that might be 4 volumes of stuff that the community can come and look at whenever they want.
So internal governance deals with how our government is going to operate. So we've got the mandatory policies, your code of conduct, your staff council relations policy, and your integrity commissioner inquiry protocol. Then delegation of authority bylaw, which again is a 270 required bylaw. Organizational and reporting structure is really important for people to see so they understand what your hierarchy looks like and where the authority flows. Hiring policy is also a 270 policy and mandatory, but really good to have that out for public education. Health and safety policies, so this is your Bill 132 policy. You may have a joint health and safety committee policy. You may have other specific policies for your municipality. Human resources policies, so many municipalities are adopting a staff code of conduct, and many ratepayers are surprised when we tell them that the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act and the Code of Conduct don't apply to staff. So the fact that we're getting that question or the surprise so frequently is one of the reasons why we wanted you to have an HR policy here so that they can see the difference between staff and council and what does and doesn't apply to staff. We did have one municipality that tried to adopt the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act requirements for staff, and that's a bit of a nightmare from an operational perspective because in small municipalities it's really hard to have staff have no interest in, particularly where you're getting the indirect and the deemed conflicts, to have no interest in any of the operation of the municipality. It's certainly not something I would recommend.
And the other thing that I've seen as well is that in the staff policies, there's this whole, all of the Conflict of Interest Act stuff, but then in the procurement bylaw, it says something totally different. So this is one of those opportunities when you're looking at your policies, make sure the definitions are the same in every policy, because that's what gets you into a bit of a conflict. I have a situation with a CAO clerk who's dealing with that right now, and the question is, which supersedes which? Well, the bylaws is law. The policy is just rules for staff to implement council's policies, so the bylaw is what you follow. So,
but a great point when you're actually setting out these schedules, when you're doing this for your municipality, to make sure that your policies are consistent, and then where they're not, bring them to the table. And then the procurement bylaw, and you can see that we've left numbers because we're expecting that you probably have other internal governance policies that you'll want to add here, specific to your municipality. So then we get to the financial matters, which is the last section. So basically we're suggesting that you lay out processes. So it's not really a policy, the adoption of the annual budget, but that is a process. Then the budget policy, if you have one for operational and capital budgets, your tax levy bylaw, both interim and final bill processes. Asset management plan can go in here, asset management policy. Sale of land, which is another of your mandatory 270 policies, would go in here. Reserve fund policy, procurement purchasing policy, another mandatory 270 policy. Check signing authority, quarterly budget to actual expenditure reports.
should have a policy.
A
on the end of it.
policy, yeah. So you're not actually
Policy.
including the,
No, you're not actually including the thing, but it's a policy about having them, as opposed to the check logs going to the council table, the disbursements.
yeah, we're finding that is really raising a lot of MCIA complaints.
Yeah.
Where council is going through each individual check. And so if you just do a variance report on a quarterly basis, it actually removes the, or reduces the potential for conflicts for councilors. Annual external audit policy,
Yeah.
because you're not going to include your audit reports.
No, it's not
every
the
year.
audit. It's about having the requirement to have an audit. You have to appoint an auditor by bylaw.
So your audit, your appointment bylaw is there.
Yeah.
And then annual audit policy.
It should be the policy, because this is what, when council wants to have the annual audit completed by.
And the last one on the list is a tool that we're seeing again from Peggy's Integrity Commissioner work. A donation policy basically delegates to staff the decision about how you're going to make donations. So the council sets the policy about what we're going to donate, what kind of organization we're going to donate to, what the thresholds are, and then staff administers it. Because we were running into problems. Frankly, the Legion was one of the biggest, because a lot of members of council are also members of the Legion. And the Legion member councillor would often come to council asking for a donation for the Remembrance Day service. Well, they're a member of a body with a pecuniary interest, so that's actually a conflict. So that particular one is what sort of was the genesis of the idea of the donation policy, so that the individual councillors are no longer involved in the specific donation, but the policy. So it again avoids the granular details to keep councillors out of the potential conflict situation. And that is our accountability and transparency bylaw in a nutshell. Are there any questions or suggestions or changes that you would like to see that come to your mind right away?
Just see, in the first section where you're going through all of the acts and you included the provincial policy statement, it's the Ontario Wildlife Damage Compensation Program.
Ontario Wildlife Damage
Compensation Program.
That goes.
Looks to be federal and provincial program.
Animals. We'll put it under animals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just not easy for me to do it now, so I will get it done and I will send this off.
What about the Marriage Act?
About, sorry, what?
Marriage Act?
Marriages Act, yes. So where's that?
Yeah, that's a disability.
I had that
I thought you did too,
under
but
general.
I didn't
mean,
read
it
it.
could have been removed.
Just searched accessibility.
So that should go,
It was there.
you
And-
could put it under structures.
Pardon?
You could put it under structures.
It's one of those ones that could go anywhere because there's
Yeah.
customer service, which would go under general government.
Okay, so put
there's-
it under general government. That's a good place for it. Public health and safety.
Okay, I'll add that after. The other one, I thought it was an
It was
investment
there.
policy. If any of you have an actual investment policy that says how you're going to invest your reserve monies. So we tried to be as exhaustive as possible, but recognize that everybody is different. And so you may or may not have some of these things. It would be a great idea to kind of keep the list so that you also know that when you do at some point in time develop an investment policy, here's where it would go in that structure of that bylaw. And the idea that I think works with this is that what council will be doing is amending the table of contents in this schedule. That's what they'll be amending, not the actual pieces of the policy that go in behind it, but that table of contents of what is involved in that section.
Okay, it's 1:30.
It's more than that.
I know.
I was thinking it's getting closer to 2:30, but it's not yet. You need to go back. Pardon? Okay, then don't.
All right, well, thank you very much for coming on such a lovely day.
And just so everyone is clear, I will be sending out a copy of the presentation so that you can now go back and educate the rest of council. And the Word as well, I'll add those couple of things in and I will send that out to you as well. And then if you have any questions, let us know. If you come up with a name for this policy for a short title, we'd be very excited to have one.
Debbie, you asked about copyright and
Yeah.
you do have a copyright notice, and the goal is to just.
So, Paul, can you speak a little louder, because I'm gonna have to send that out to the others.
So that if you change it without us looking at it, that it's kind of at your own risk, and that you won't give it to people in an editable form who haven't come here. So.
Just these, yeah. I kind of feel that if people aren't willing to come out and share the experience and be part of the work, then they shouldn't get the hard work that you've done for nothing. Because we think it's more than just the bylaw. It's about the training, it's about the discussion, and it's about how now you can educate the rest of, like I said, the rest of council and even your staff team, so. So you want to collect those before they leave?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to sign off for those of you that are online. Thank you for
Were there
joining
any
us.
questions
Or
from
do you-
online before we do that?
I guess I should do that, yes.
You trust me so that you don't.
Is the 18th really?
Yes, it is.
Boy, it's already.
Yeah, he said that.
Yes,
Thanks very much for coming.
That was like.
Your feedback and your help.
Good. You gotta get back because we have a council meeting tonight.
All right.
Same here.
Thank you, Lynn. So that's an efficient team. You don't have to name them both.
Yes. And meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.